Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 30 of the Clown Fiesta podcast. I'm Blue Jay, joined by JNT250 as always, and a lot going on this past week. Oh my god, it might be a little bit of a longer episode. Quick couple things. One, we want to apologize for not doing an episode last week because, well, we had some power issues. JNT is in Texas, of course, and as many of you know, there was some pretty big issues there. So we apologize for not getting you guys an episode last week. But we're going to do our best to try to catch up on everything this week. Another huge shout out to Travis, obviously, for the raid. So for those that don't know and aren't watching live, Travis Gafford just raided us. So huge shout out to him, of course. And also shout out for last week or 2 weeks ago rather, because he retweeted one of our posts on Twitter for our episode. And that was really nice and really helpful. And we saw our viewership hit a level that we never hit before. So thank you guys so much. And for all those that are listening live in Twitch, be sure to hit the follow button. We do want to grow our live viewership more. Be sure to find us on YouTube. We are also on Spotify and other podcast platforms, so you can find us on there by searching for Clown Fiesta Podcast. Now, let's get underway, right? Because there's lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, especially because we missed an episode.
Yeah, there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot to catch up on, but the main talk right now is about imports, and there's a lot of different opinions out there. There's a lot of different thoughts on it. I'll have you start us off, JNT. Give us a lowdown of what people may have missed of what's going on with all the import discussions.
Yeah, well, I think I don't remember the exact date, but it was around 2 weeks ago when Travis pretty much came out with the report that many of the LCS owners are campaigning for Riot to remove the import rule in the NALCS, which stirred up a ton of controversy when it originally came up, but more specifically during this past weekend with a lot of owners or high-profile owners, specifically Jack and Reggie, being very vocal about them wanting to change and how much they love imports. We saw like with the Reggie, the imports tweet. But basically, two of the biggest owners in the NALCS are for this potential change. And I think it stirred up a ton of controversy during the games this week, as we specifically saw in the Dignitas TSM game. Dignitas being an all-NA roster, taking down TSM, and then kind of memeing on them about the whole imports tweet. They responded with their no imports tweet. But it was a pretty good, like, funny back and forth. A ton of memes going around. The McDonald's meme from Vulcan, where Vulcan tweeted out basically saying, if you want to import players from a region, just go play in that region. And Reggie proceeded to respond with, you'd be earning minimum wage if it wasn't for the import rule. And this whole McDonald's meme just came out of nowhere. And it's McDonald's, I feel like, has always been a little bit of a meme, but
The memes are great, right? Like the memes are actually awesome. It's something that the LCS really needs right now, for being completely honest. We need some freaking memes, man. Because I think that the LCS is just getting less interesting as time goes on, or at least the viewership is dipping, which could suggest that. Anyways, much needed memes, but this is also something that's really serious and people are really fired up about, because I think there's a lot of people, us included, I would say, that feel like we don't want to just see a bunch of imports come over to the LCS and just become kind of a league that is no longer North American. I think that's one of the best things about the LCS right now, is that it's something like, sure, we know that the LCS doesn't have a lot of international success, but if it ever does happen, I definitely want it to be with people representing North America, not necessarily a full Korean or a full Chinese lineup. Which then kind of sparked Jack to say something along the line. Maybe you can help me out here, but basically Jack was saying that he thought it was a little bit xenophobic or something along those lines if people thought differently, right?
yeah, there was a bit of not a bit of, there was quite a long back and forth in, I don't remember where, like, what form it was. Well, it was on Reddit, but I don't know if it was on like the main league subreddit or the Cloud9 subreddit, but it was basically Jack discussing with various Reddit commenters, about their opinions on the import rule, and he got into quite a lengthy back and forth with one person in particular, whom Jack said that his words could be perceived as racist or xenophobic, and that, instantly, when you hear terms like that thrown around, it just jumps right to the top of Reddit and becomes an instant topic of discussion. And it kind of felt like in the moment and after everything had settled down, like Jack didn't necessarily mean that. He might have gotten, caught up in a bit of the heat of the moment, and they sort of like ended up like agreeing to disagreeing on various topics. I read through the whole post, but it was very lengthy and like a lot of back and forth. But, people have really strong opinions about this potential change. It feels like unless you're the owners, everyone else is pretty much against this change. We're hearing a ton of players, analysts, people just generally within the scene that are not for this change and would like to see the import rule stay, but potentially maybe have some adjustments to it, but not to completely remove it. It kind of just feels like you're either on one side or the other. There's not really much of a middle ground. And when that's the case, there becomes a lot of extreme opinions and a ton of back and forth, which is what we're seeing.
Yeah, it definitely is the case. And one of the most recent people to come out and speak against it was actually Santorin. Basically, he came out and said that, look, he would be willing to give up his NA residency if it meant that he could keep the import rules or something along those lines, which basically shows to me just how strongly players are feeling about these kind of changes. And we saw Voy Boy on the stairs. We know shit's real when Voy Boy hits the stairs, right? Voy Boy was saying like, look, this is something he doesn't really want to see Voy Boy obviously playing the LCS in the past, and obviously having like he really cares about the LCS, of course. So we're just seeing a bunch of people come in and speak against the potential changes, and I think with good reason.
Yeah. Various, then I guess another thing to sort of follow up with this import discussion is there's then been a lot of discussion regarding North American talent and North American talent development. I feel like one of the things that was especially said in the various press conferences that Travis held with a lot of the teams was them being very vocal in terms of if we want this import rule to go, we still have a very high focus on NA talent development and NA production. And, when you really take a look at it, NA production continues to go down. I actually, just before, as we were doing our prep for the show, I just wanted to go through every single team and just see the number of NA players that are on each team and, the number of imports that are actually in the league. So just from all the teams and all the data I pulled, 15 out of the potential 20 import slots are being used. And in the majority of cases, teams that don't have import slots being utilized are bottom tier teams. And then beyond that, only 24 out of 50 of the starting LCS players are native North Americans. Now, obviously, with all of that, there's a bunch of imports who have now, quote unquote, become NA residents due to them playing in the league for 4+ years. There's a ton of, top players in the league that are, now considered NA residents. And most North American fans believe are truly NA players like Jensen, players like Sven Skaren, players like Impact, Hooney just got his residency, I believe, at the start of season 11. There's a ton of high-profile imports that have come to NA previously that now are, they fit the sort of NA culture and NA view, which is starting to create, a lot of teams that don't actually have very many North American players on them. If you look at some of the top teams like Team Liquid, they only have one North American player on their team, and that's Tactical. The other 4 players are or were imports at one time, and specifically on Team Liquid, they have Santorin and Jensen, who have now sort of transitioned in terms of the import rule to North American players. Same goes for a team like 100 Thieves with the whole OCE changes and OCE becoming NA. They don't count towards the import rule, but they still technically are imports. But it's just pretty crazy to see, like, if you actually take a look at all of these various teams, how small the NA talent pool really is. And then that also kind of begs the question, like, how good are these NA players? Because there's probably only a few resident NA players that you would say are actually top players in the league.
Yeah, well, from all of that though, so I do agree with you. There are just a few that are NA players that are at the top of the league. But my biggest fear, and I think the biggest fear from a lot of other people, is what if you now just have a full Korean team, right? That's the biggest fear, and I think the reason for that is because we've seen what happens before with the Overwatch League. We've seen where Cloud9 has been an owner of a team in the Overwatch League, and we saw them actually go out and get a full team of Koreans to represent their org, and then they ended up winning it all, right? And so that's where there's a lot of controversy there. Is like, is that going to copy and paste? And I remember someone tweeting, it might have been Travis, I don't remember, but someone tweeted out, if you don't something along the lines of like, if you don't what's the saying? If you don't learn from your mistakes, you're you're likely to repeat it or whatever. You know what I think people know what expression I'm talking about. Basically, people are afraid that they're going to make that same mistake, but just copy and paste it over to the LCS from the Overwatch League, right?
Yeah, and I guess like even another League of Legends example is just like the whole LMQ situation. I know there's a ton of new school LoL fans, but even if you just look back to season 4, not too long ago in the grand scheme of things, but in terms of League of Legends, a very early on version of professional League of Legends was LMQ in season 4, who came over to North America at the start of 2014, qualified to LCS through the Challenger League. Was it called the Challenger League at that point? Maybe
It
it
might have
wasn't
been
called that,
Challenger
but
Series or something. I don't remember, but I know what
yeah.
you're talking about.
Yeah, but they qualified to the LCS through the Challenger Series, then competed in the LCS in the summer split of 2014, ended up finishing in 3rd place, going to Worlds as, the number 3 seed in NA for Worlds. They didn't make it out of groups. I think they were in a group with like Fnatic, OMG, some other team, but they went 2-4 in the group stage if I remember correctly. But the thing that I feel like when people bring up the whole LMQ situation is like people forget that LMQ was actually first in that season for almost the entire season. It was only until the last week of that summer split in 2014 where Cloud9 actually overtook them in the standings to finish the season. And then, TSM ended up winning that split against C9 in I think it was a 3-2 finals. That was like the Wild Turtle quadra kill or something. I think he was playing Tristana. But people forget that like LMQ was dominating that season, and while they didn't necessarily place at the top of NA and they didn't do the best at Worlds, who knows? What if they ended up finishing the season in first and they go to Worlds as the first NA seed and they do something similar to Cloud9 did when Cloud9 got out of their group at that time, played a good series against Samsung Blue at Worlds. And I feel like this is a completely different question.
Well, and the other thing that I want to compare as well is that if we're talking about way back in season 4, like the game is different now, and I would also say that there's a good chance that the gap between North American players and Chinese players is even larger than it was back then. And so now, if you were to, or Korean players for that matter, whatever it may be, if you were to grab those players, maybe you would see an even bigger like gap in play because maybe not all the teams would be able to afford those players, right? Maybe like you would still have Golden Guardians, who's known to be a team with a lower salary, competing with like a budget NA team going up against I don't even know Nuggery and Faker and these kinds of players, right? Like it would be an absolute disaster, and that would be I don't know I guess the LCS would be really interesting, but not in a good way. I don't think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like there's two schools of thought when it comes to how the LCS would be affected by there being no import rule. It's kind of like there's the one school of thought where no import rule, you're just going to straight up buy best import players available from a specific region. And like you said, that could see a full Chinese roster coming over, or a full Korean roster coming over to North America, and just basically building a super team. And then there's the other school of thought where potentially there's a chance to buy up younger and cheaper LPL and LCK squads who maybe have just qualified to who have just won through the LCK Challenger Series. I don't know what the LCK Challenger Series is, but basically teams like Griffin and Damwon, when they had just started getting good, because both Damwon and Griffin qualified to the LCK through the Challengers League in season 8 and season 9, and basically instantly became top teams in the region. And if you're an NA owner during that time, let's say, for example, one of these teams became available and you were allowed to import that whole team, that team would just come to NA and just smash the entire league. Imagine season 8 Griffin or season 9 Damwon just entirely coming to NA. It would not even be close.
Yeah. That's a really good point. That's something that I hadn't even thought of yet. The other thing that I want to talk about in this scenario is something that you brought up earlier in regards to salary cap. Did you want to take it away with your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, and I was also, what I was going to say also ties into something somebody just said in the live chat, how somebody's noting that with the import rule, there's no reason imports would be so expensive. And I think also with that, there are, again, sort of two schools of thought. On one side, yes, imports could become less expensive because being an import isn't as there's not as high of a price tag, or there's not there's not that luxury of, oh, you're an import player, so you have to sort of fight amongst the best teams to get one out of a possible 2 slots on your roster. But on the flip side, once imports become more widely available to all the teams, especially not necessarily those top teams, but also the middle of the pack teams, I feel like that can also create that same bidding war where you're going to be bidding for the best players available. When you think of like if you're a Team Liquid roster right now and the import rule now gets removed, think of the possible players that you can replace Tactical with. Like there are a ton of amazing 80 carries in the LCK and the LPL that you could replace Tactical with, and what you and would be probably an upgrade. I'm just gonna throw it out there. What if they got Ruler, like CoreJJ's
Yeah, that's
former
my first thought is Ruler,
CoreJ's
honestly.
former ADC? But at the same time, you then have to take a look at all the rest of the teams, and now that import rule has been removed for them, they also now have potential to get an upgrade at the 80 carry position, and will then also be fighting amongst those teams who need players from a specific position. So it's kind of weird. I feel like there's two ways it could go, and it would be really interesting to see. But like we were just talking about, this was something that I actually want to bring up, post as my take for the next Hotline League show, was basically potentially discussing a salary cap to whether it just be the LCS or the esports scene as a whole. And I think it's very interesting because, how would a salary cap really affect, the teams in the LCS in terms of players they're allowed to buy? Look at Cloud9 and the crazy buyout that they had for Perks, and presumably he got a very lucrative contract to come play for Cloud9. And how that affects teams in terms of building their rosters if you put a hard salary cap in the league and now you can't go and pay for one super expensive player, and you then have to sort of, spread your money throughout your entire roster. And I think in that sense, that's where we could see NALCS teams buying up on the rise, challenger LPL teams and challenger LCK teams. Then on the flip side, if it's a very high salary cap, that allows teams to spend really big. And I just think if this rule were to get removed, it would just be like a crazy road that like the LCS could go down in terms of like spending money. I feel like you're going to need a lot of money to compete in the NALCS if they remove this rule.
Yeah, no doubt. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about if they were to implement a salary cap. So the narrative that we're kind of being told. So first of all, let's say that the answers from the owners of the different teams have been very vague, as Travis has showed in his videos. But a lot of them are kind of saying like still they want to see the import rules lifted and see no more imports. But if a salary cap were to be implemented on top of that, I wonder if their idea would change of how many imports they want to bring in. Because what we're being fed is, well, we think there's talent globally, and well, we think that we're a global esports org. Well, what if there was a salary cap, and now go out and get Chovy times 10? Well, maybe they're suddenly not so interested in the imports anymore. And I'm not saying that that's the case, but you would maybe see some hypocrisy there if there were a salary cap added on top of lifting the import rules. Now that's all hypothetical, but it's just an interesting thought. If maybe, now that there's a salary cap, maybe I'm not that interested in imports anymore, But yeah, it's just a thought anyway.
Yeah, another just something I saw in the live chat that I just wanted to address and give my thoughts on is somebody said removing the rule won't suddenly mean that everybody wants to come to NA.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Do you think Bang would want to come back?
Well, I mean, while that does, in theory, make sense, one thing that the LCS has going for them is they have a lot of big spenders in their league and teams that want to spend money. And if you really take a look at it, a lot of LCS players, if you compare their average salary to the rest of the world, they actually make probably equal or better, I would say, to the rest of the world. There are a ton of LCK players, especially good LCK players, that are on very cheap contracts. Even some of the top LCK players don't have as big of contracts as the LCS players. I remember, what was it, like a month ago? There was a
Reddit post, but it was taken down though, so we can't go back and look at it.
But
I just remember Chovy is not making $1 million. That's what I remember.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, Chovy was making $600,000.
Something like that, yeah.
It was around 600K USD. And you take a look at it, Chovy is, he's the second best mid in the LCK, I would say, behind Showmaker. And
it goes back and forth. Like you could argue for either one.
It's one of those two. But basically, you then look at a lot of the NALCS players in terms of what they're making. Like Jensen's making double what Chovy's making.
Think about that.
So like you're telling me if the import rule didn't exist in North America and Chovy got offered double his salary to come to NA, I'm not Chovy, but if I was Chovy, I'd take a double my salary to come to NA. But I mean, that's just me.
Yeah. Chovy would come over with like an American flag on his backpack and on all of his gear, and like he'd be ready to go, K Kona.
Chovy's a
But
beast.
anyway,
I love that guy.
yeah. Really lots of interesting topics, lots of interesting stuff on the import rules. Is there anything else that you really wanted to get into? I don't want to go too much more into it because it's been talked about so much, and I do know that people that are listening to this show are also going to be calling or looking to call into Hotline League tonight, and there'll be talks about it on there as well. Is there anything else that you wanted to get into specifically on imports, JNT?
I think that's it. Did we miss? I can't think of anything else. No, that's about it.
No, we're going to see some changes. Well, I shouldn't say we're going to see some changes. We're going to see more discussion on this about whether there will be changes. One last thought that I wanted to leave with on this specific topic is that in one of the videos that Travis just put up on his YouTube channel, he made the very good point that it's not just the LCS that decides this. This has to go up through like a lot of different people. He mentions that normally if there's a change for the LCS, all the 10 owners have to get together and agree and then bring it to Chris Greeley, the commissioner. But there's much more to it than that because all the other regions are affected as well. And that's the other thing that I think would really be sad is that it wouldn't only change the LCS, but it would really significantly hurt the LCK or the LPL. And I think that's something else that you need to consider when you go ahead and make changes like this. Because the LCK and the LPL are leagues with a lot of fans and a lot of passionate fans, I should say. And I think that it's really affecting them too. And you have to think about everyone who's affected by these kind of changes.
Yeah, I think it was Carlos who tweeted out about 2 weeks ago when the news officially broke was that if you're considering this change to the LCS, you have to consider it to every single region. And I think at the time
Yeah.
people hadn't really realized that like it's not just a simple change that North America has to make. Like this is a huge like
Right.
esport defining decision, which like goes up the whole ladder. Like if you watched his most recent video, like the decision would be put on like the head of global esports operation. I'm sorry, I forget the guy's name,
Yeah, me
but
too.
I think his
Actually, wasn't it the same guy though who actually I think this was also in the Travis video. It was the same guy that said he doesn't want North America to be an import region or something like that, which
yeah,
is hella funny now.
yeah.
That's oof. That's something you can't take off the internet. That's there to stay. That's there forever. But
I
anyway,
mean, I guess now that I just think about it, the only other thing that I would really want to discuss in terms of like this topic is like how just like your league, how you then brand your league if the LCS just becomes filled with a ton of imports, especially non-English speaking imports. Yes, obviously imports, if they come to the LCS, will probably have to learn English as they could be communicating with, you know, North American resident players. That includes, your top NA players and your former imports that have now become NA residents. But I feel like it'd be very difficult to, market your league and market your best players. Like obviously hypothetical. Let's say some of the top players you get a Nugri, you get a Chovy, you get a Carrier, I don't know, top player in LCK, LPL, you name it. I feel like it'd be very difficult to market that player in a North American league. Like it's not a person you can bring a lot of hype behind around in terms of like rivalries and doing a lot of content around them. I don't know. It would feel
no,
very
it's a good point.
awkward to how do you brand the LCS if they make this change? You didn't like I don't know. It feel like it becomes way less of a North American product.
Yep. And also somebody else in the live chat brings up a good point as well, saying, wouldn't LPL want to change this or want this change to import more Koreans as
For
well? And
sure.
I think the answer is absolutely
And I
yes,
think I
because
think
they're already trying to import. They already import a fair bit of Koreans, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, but I
Most
mean,
teams have one. We looked at it a couple weeks ago.
yeah, I think to be honest though, you could also argue it for the reverse. Like, let's not forget, like, um,
Yep.
we're 1 year removed from the LPL being considered the best region in the world, and sure, maybe that could be shifting back to the LCK with Damwon, and they obviously won Worlds last year, and they're looking very good moving into this season again. But who knows? Like maybe this could actually lead to some Chinese teams wanting to go to the LCK instead of going to the LPL, because there's the argument. The argument can be made that the LPL style can be more effective than the LCK style if there's some very fast-paced, aggressive LPL teams that would want to go to the LCK and potentially run over these very slow-paced teams. I'm not saying that would happen, but I feel like it's a scenario you could consider.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of unknown, and I think that's why they won't rush to any decisions. Not that I ever think they would, but they're not going to rush to any decisions. They're going to discuss it a lot before they do decide to either change or not change anything. And you've heard all the owners and all the LCS owners rather say that like it's not so black and white of just yeah just do it or yeah don't do it. There's a lot that's going to go into this, and so we're probably going to be hearing about some things here and there for quite some time. Um, anyways, let's get into some of the changes that we should expect to see in the LCS, because one thing that we know is going to come up next week is going to be patch 11.4. Patch 11.4 has quite a bit of jungle changes. That's the main thing people are focusing on, but there are some champion buffs and nerfs as well. So I'll let you take it away. Let's inform everyone of just what we're looking to see or what we're going to see as far as the jungle changes in patch 11.4.
Yeah, anytime they change the jungle, it usually results in a lot of like meta defining things. I think back to like season 8 when it was all about like 2-minute crab spawns and it was all about level 2 ganking junglers. You had like your Zinzaos, your Camille's, and then they pushed back the Scuttle spawn to 315, and then it all became about like level 3 junglers. But the changes that they're making right now are mainly gold and experience nerfs in the jungle. I think they're reducing about like 10, anywhere between 10 and 20 gold on all of the small camps, being like your Gromp. I guess it's the Gromp, the big Raptor, the large Krug, and the small Krug, but not the medium Krug and not the small Raptors. But they're basically nerfing.
Brendan,
What were you about to say?
go ahead.
Well, they're nerfing the gold across all those camps, and they're also nerfing the experience from all those camps from levels 1 to 9. So if you don't know, the jungle XP for those camps sort of scale up from levels 1 to 9. So they're kind of toning that scale up down a little bit. But post level 9, basically the experience stays the same, but pre-level 9, junglers are getting a bit of nerfs. So basically, it's coming with the idea that your hard farming junglers will potentially go down in priority a little bit. These are champions like your Nidalee, your Graves, maybe your Hecarim, maybe even your Udi or Olaf. So depending on how impactful these changes end up being, we could see a huge shift in the jungle meta.
Yeah, the TLDR is that the jungle is getting nerfed, and we should see a shift. And what I wanted to ask you was, one, what champions do we think we're going to see from it? I know you just talked about that a little bit, but also I wanted to talk about what teams do we think are going to be most affected by this in the LCS. Right off the top of my head, I think that this is actually a buff for Team Liquid, because Santorin, as we saw last year, was actually really good at getting early ganks off and being very aggressive as far as his ganking and early presence in the lanes last year. And so I think that that's something we could potentially see.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Santorin on FlyQuest was actually the best jungler in the LCS after sort of Cloud9's collapse in the second half of the summer split. I don't know, his early like presence in terms of ganking on junglers is really, really good. And I think with there being, these jungle changes and potentially the hard farming champions going down a little bit, definitely buffs Team Liquid. The other teams that I think that it actually buffs is EG. I think Svenskeren is definitely a lot better on your tanky engage team fighting junglers as opposed to your hard farming scaling junglers. I think especially when he was on C9, that was his primary job, was finding great fights, good team fights around objectives, and I think that definitely buffs him. The only other one that I can really think of that it might be good for, that people might not think about as much, is actually Xerxes on Immortals. One of his best play style when he was playing on Origin was being a tank utility player for his fantastic laners in Alphari and Upset, that's who he was playing with at the time, and that's when Origin was like a top team. And I think it was like season 9 and the first half of season 10. Origin was Origin was a top team in the LEC. Again, they sort of had a bit of a meltdown in summer, ended up finishing in 10th. But even then, Alphari was still like the best top laner in the whole of the LEC. And I think Xerxes, when he was playing at his best, was when he was playing tank utility and playing around his strong laners. And I think Immortals has some pretty strong laners. I think I like Destiny and not Destiny, Revenge and Insanity.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree, and I want to know what kind of champions do you think we're going to see? Do you think we're going to see? Well, the first one that came to mind, because I was talking about Santorin, was What did we see him play last year when he was ganking so aggressively? And I remember him playing actually a fair bit of Trundle, and so it made me wonder. We did see a little bit of Trundle. I can't remember if I was watching the LCK or the LPL. Regardless, they're not even on patch 11.4 yet, but they started playing the Trundle, and so that's one of the champions that I think we might see.
Yeah, I think of champions like it's kind of just like your staple jungle champions like the Jarvan, the Sejuani, maybe the Trundle. The only reason why I'm hesitant on Trundle is Trundle got like a pretty big indirect nerf when they made the jungle smite changes where it's no longer Hunter's Machete and Hunter's Talisman. It's only like the Ember Knife, or I don't even know what the other one is because I really only build Ember Knife. But I think there are a couple champions like that did get some inadvertent nerfs. I think Trundle's one of them. Who knows? We could see more of it, but I don't know if Trundle will become that like top tier champion like he was last split. But the main two that I think of are like Jarvan and Sejuani.
Jarvan was definitely one that came to mind for me just because of, well, he's already being played as well. He's another champion that we've seen rise in priority again before patch 11.4. That's another one that I think that we might see. Just laughing at the live chat.
Yeah, I feel like also like on the flip side, I think we're definitely gonna see, the Nidalee, the Graves, like those two specifically, I feel like are the champions that are gonna get most affected by this, because I think like your Udyrs and your Olafs still have a ton of value. Like yes, while they are very good at the hard farming playstyle and getting a lot of gold and utilizing that gold very well in the early game, the champions also provide a ton of utility. Like Udyr, he just runs at people, bear slaps them on repeat, stuns them down, whacks them with some fire, and it's GG. And at the same, and Olaf, he does a great job of diving the backline, providing a lot of damage and sustain in team fights. But picks like the Graves and the Nidalee, on the other hand, those champions are all about the hard farming, getting an early game advantage, taking early Drake. If you're playing Nidalee, like doing some Nidalee Renekton top lane dive. But I think those two champions specifically are going to get reduced a ton in terms of priority. At least that's what I predict.
Yeah, and we've seen lots of them, so I think you're right. We should see a reduce in priority. I do want to go out of the jungle though, because there were some other buffs and nerfs and things of that nature that, or just other champions that we've started to see rise in priority. The first one that I want to talk about is Jinx. So Jinx got a lot of buffs. I think it was on 11.3, but they also nerfed her base health, and so she wasn't as strong. But then they gave in 11.4, I believe they gave her health back. And so Jinx is an AD carry that I'm thinking we're going to see a lot of. I believe there was also nerfs to Kai'Sa and Samira, if I'm not mistaken. I should have looked into this.
Yeah,
I did,
Kai'Sa's.
but it was
I
yesterday.
just have the patch notes up just
Go
to
ahead.
shed some light on it. But Kai'Sa's Q is getting nerfed. It's obviously her best spell. I still think Kai'Sa is going to be top tier, if not still the best AD carry. Samira, on the other hand, holy fuck, that champion seems like it's getting gutted. I think Samira
Yeah,
is gonna just not be relevant anymore at
I think
all.
Samira's gone as well.
Like her dash speed got decreased. She can no longer dash to ally targets. Only like a lot of times, like we'd see Samira's like dashing like through allied minions early on into fights to, just to have like a huge impact early in the laning phase. Also, her ult's getting nerfed from a 3-second CD to an 8-second CD, so you can't really reset in team fights anymore. Also, her passive damage is getting nerfed early. Like, there's a ton of nerfs hitting Samira, and I think that champion was already starting to fall off a little bit in terms of prio, and I think now it's kind of gone.
Yep. And another champion that I saw on the patch notes that I thought might be affected was Renekton. I know he got a nerf to his Q, I think it was, so some of his sustain, which is one of the best things about Renekton right now. I mean, let's be honest, he's able to smash lane, but one of the reasons he's able to smash lane is he has really good sustain. And so if you take some of that away, I wonder if we're going to see as much priority as we've seen on Renekton. We've seen we've seen a lot of it all over the world, honestly, in all of the major regions. So that's another champion that I think we might see a little bit less priority on. Were there any champions that you wanted to see more of, JNT, that like you thought the LCS needs or anything like that, or maybe less of for that matter?
Yeah, I think one pick that a lot of people enjoyed, I know especially Azale did on the cast on Sunday, was Newbie picking the Janna into the Rel.
Let's
Um,
go. I mentioned that a few weeks ago. Do you remember? I was like,
yeah,
we
yeah, I
need to
know.
see Janna.
I
I'm
remember.
fired up about that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Janna has been a pretty common pick into Rel in terms of like just I don't know, like regular like League of Legends games, like in ranked or whatever. Like Janna's like a pretty good counter to it, but we've never really seen it being whipped out in pro play. And I think Newbie did a pretty good job in terms of like shutting down the Rel. I know there was a couple times in that 100 Thieves Golden Guardians game where Huhi did find a pretty like godly engage where he got like a 3-man Rel ult into the Orianna ult, but ultimately, Golden Guardians won that game. I think a big part of it was shutting down the Rel from like the start of the game to about 30 minutes.
It's so good into that combo. That's literally what 100 Thieves wanted to do with that combo is you play the Orianna with the Rel, you wombo. But with the Janna ultimate, it just completely shuts that down. And the only combo, I, I want to say, I think the only combo that they got off, I know there was one, it was in the top lane at like around inhibitor. Um, that one play was when the Janna ultimate was down. So that was just a punish on 100 Thieves and a little bit of over aggression from Golden Guardian. So to me, I didn't think there was anything wrong with the pick. I was really shaking my head at the start of the game. Crumbs is saying that like he doesn't like the Janna pick, and because Janna like he face checked the brush on top of a Rel. Like, yeah, you're gonna die. Like, anyways, I was just shaking my head because Crumbs was saying that he didn't like the Janna pick, and I was like, I can't wait to see how good this Janna is the rest of the game because you knew it would be. It's so good against that combo, and I've been waiting to see it, and I'm really glad that we got to see it.
Yeah, the only thing that I wonder though is like if Janna is just like a little bit too easy to punish in terms of the early game. Like, NA's finest in the chat could probably he would know a lot more about this topic than either of us do because he plays a lot of Janna. But
Janna
I would think that especially in professional play, like Janna would be really susceptible to early game tower dives and just a lot of chaos happening in the early game, bringing multiple people down to the bot lane because it is such a squishy champion. But I mean, I don't exactly know, but I would think that maybe it's a little more difficult to pull off in pro play, just due to the more like just better execution in terms of players and what they do during the game and just generally how the game flows.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to highlight was we're seeing a lot of Tristana, and I think we're going to see more of it. It's really, really good. We saw Perks pop off with it, but we've also seen other players do really well with it as well. I think that we're going to see more Tristana, especially into the Twisted Fate, because there were a few teams prioritizing Twisted Fate, and Tristana just punishes that by being able to hard shove and take plates if the TF tries to go to another lane. And so I think that also the all-in potential on Tristana is good too onto the TF. Just a really good counter pick, and so I think that that's another pick that we might see. It's really looking really, really good. Shen, I'm a huge fan of Shen. I like it with the Hecarim, but we haven't seen a lot of it. We've seen Impact look great on Shen, but I mean, Impact has looked great on pretty much everything at this point. And the one last thing for me that I want to see is I want to see more. I'm hesitating. I want to see more Jace? Question mark. NA Jace. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I want to see it into Gnar. We saw 100 Thieves try to bring it out against TSM, and I don't think it went that well, but I don't think it was because the Jace is bad into the Gnar. It's great into the Gnar, in fact. I just think there was some missed execution in that game, and I think that most times last year we would have seen Someday smash that lane and hard carry the game. I don't know why we didn't so much this week, but I would like to see him on the Jace again. I think that make up for it if he gets that chance again to play the Jace. And so I think Jace is really strong, especially into the Gnar pick. And I think that that's another pick we should see a little bit more of.
Yeah, one other pick in the mid lane that I actually want to see a little bit more of, mainly just due to sort of the mid lane champion pool that's popping up. Like pretty much it's all control mages right now. And then you have your couple champions that you can play to sort of basically ignore the control mages, like the Tristana you kind of mentioned, where you basically just try to all in early game. If you can get a lead, you just start like running down towers and you just get a huge gold lead off that. But one other pick that's really good in control mages that I want to see a little bit more of is Echo. Echo is like a known good matchup into the Syndra, into the Orianna, and even good into Azir, which those three control mages are kind of like the top tier of mid lane at this current moment. Is also pretty good into Victor, which we're also seeing a little bit more of in the mid lane. And right now we actually have a lot of good Echo players in North America. Perks has a good Echo. Jizuke has a good Echo. I think those are the two players that I definitely... Echo was the pick that I was looking for Perks to play against Team Liquid in that fourth game yesterday. I really thought they were going to pick like something like Echo mid into Team Liquid's comp because I actually thought it was pretty good. Also combos pretty well with Skarner. But they went with the Lucian mid instead. We'll talk about that game later. But I think Echo is actually a pretty good pick if you want to play a little bit more to your side lane, and if the mid laner you have is good enough to play that melee into control mage sort of matchup.
Well, actually, I think we could talk about it now if you want to. I'm ready to get into the power rankings if you are. Is there anything else, any other champions or anything you want to see out of 11.4?
I don't know.
I think we can get into the power rankings and let's get going on that.
Sure.
We got a lot to cover anyways, so
I
we
think
may as well
we'll
hop into
start from
that.
the bottom, right? I think we'll save
Yeah, sure. Whatever you want to
the
do.
spicy stuff for last.
Sure.
Okay, I'll just pull them up right here. We can already get into it before I'm pulling up. Golden Guardians, they're last. I know they just won their game against 100 Thieves, and it was a decent game from Golden Guardians. I think Ablaze Olive had a really good game on the Trist mid. I think that was like the main thing that I was watching for in that game. But we both have Golden Guardians as the 10th place team. If you look at the rest of their games, the entirety of the split, they just don't look very good. There's not much
We
to
did
say.
see some good things in the 100 Thieves game, though, right? Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
completely discount it. Like, are they looking great as a whole? No, they're not, honestly. They're not looking that good, but this is to be expected of a development roster. And yes, they are not the only development roster in the league, but they are definitely the most development you can get kind of thing. So, are they looking good? Of course not, but this isn't a surprise to anyone. You did mention that you think that Olive looked good on the Tristana. I actually didn't think he looked that great. I thought he looked good in the first half of the game. When it came time to team fights and being able to execute, I didn't think he actually looked that good.
He was
Not that I thought he
pussying out a
looked
bit
awful.
late game.
Yeah,
The
not that I
pressure the
thought he looked
pressure was
awful.
getting to him.
It didn't feel like someone who's been in that scenario many times with a Tristana. That's what it felt like. I didn't think he was awful, but there's still some room for improvement there, and I think that's totally fine, and that's what you're expecting to see. We're still seeing Niles kind of run it down a lot. Um, the thing is, I don't want to harp on this every week, right? But
No, I'm
it's what we're
sorry.
seeing,
He's
right?
the worst player in the LCS, and it's not close for me. Like,
Probably,
that guy, like
yeah.
the problem. Like, okay, here's the thing: if he was just like, he was just not very good. Like, sure, he's not very good, but it just feels like he's just making a ton of unnecessary mistakes. We're seeing him die so many times in top lane, specifically when he has information on the enemy jungler and is then playing disrespectful with that
He
information
don't
and
care,
is
eh?
just walking up in lane and dying. Like, I don't care. Like, if you're just like inting it, you're inting it and you're just bad.
Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up was like, we know this is a development roster, right? And so we do think that Golden Guardians is going to be very patient with him. But I just want to remind people that I don't think he's the only player they're trying to develop specifically in the top lane right now. They do have Tally in Academy. Now, I'm not saying it's time to bring in a new top laner and try to, I'm not saying that, but it wouldn't surprise me if we eventually get to that point if this continues, right? Let's say
Mm-hmm.
Tally starts to look good in Academy and they think, oh, we want to give this guy some reps at the LCS level. That's something that's totally realistic, and I think that's fine because I think what would maybe happen is let's say we get through all of spring and Niles is still looking pretty lackluster. I think if they were to swap those two players, people would be like, I thought you were developing and you're not being patient. I'm just saying you need to, I want to remind people that there's two players that they're developing in that role specifically, maybe even more if they have some players in the amateur scene. But definitely, like, it's to me it's not like so black and white of you're developing or Niles or you're not developing Niles. I think that there's a chance that we could see a swap there and they're not giving up on Niles, but I mean that's a little bit of speculation. I don't think we're there yet.
One thing that I think makes potential roster swaps a little more interesting is actually the changes that they've made to the LCS season. Now that your record, in spring and summer counts as one and therefore affects your standings for the summer playoffs, which is what ultimately matters to make worlds, is like organizations are going to have to find that, like, they're going to have to figure out when is the ideal time to potentially start experimenting with your roster or substituting out poor performing players. Like, you might, like, it might be too little too late if you wait till the end of spring split to sub it back in. Like, how long is the spring split? It's 18 games, correct? It's 18
Yep.
games, right? So, like,
Yes.
again, for example, we're halfway through the split. Golden Guardians, wait, they have 2 wins or 1 win?
Yeah. Yeah, they have 2 wins, 2-7.
So
Oh wait. No, they're 2-7. They're 2-7.
they're 2-7. Let's say, for example, they go 2-7 again in the back half, and then they're sitting at the end of spring split with, what would that be, 4-14, with then another 27 games to play. Like, you have to kind of figure out, like, when is the time we actually need to make roster decisions if their goal is to potentially make playoffs in the summer split. 14 losses could be too late for the rest of these teams who seem to be performing very well, especially some teams who we didn't expect to be, as high up as they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. But I think when it comes to Golden Guardians, though, I think they don't really have any expectation on making playoffs or anything like that. I think they've made that pretty clear. Their plans for this year is simply to just develop as best as they can. And another thing I'll say too is that I think Golden Guardians has done a really good job of that. Like they've had a really good history of developing players, and so even though they're not looking great, Nate, right now, it's still only middle to late February. Like lots of time for this team to get better still. And even though even though they're not looking great, they've still been able to pick up a couple of wins, which is really saying something as well. I guess a good team as well, right?
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
against
who
100
knows?
Thieves.
They could have actually won that TSM game as well. Like they could be 3-6, but
Yeah, which would actually be kind of crazy.
but what is like? Well, yes, we just said there's a potential that they could have 3 wins. On the flip side, their losses have been pretty bad losses in terms of their team's performance and everything. Like if you go look back at some of their losses, teams like Cloud9, even like Dignitas or EG, like these are games that like they're getting stomped in, and it's not even close. Like there's a clear gap individually and team cohesion wise.
Yeah. I'm just seeing someone in the live chat saying TL1 question mark.
We'll get to it.
I totally get why you're saying that, by the way. And I just want to say, like, I had a really hard time with 1 through 5, honestly. I could have probably switched them in any way, but yeah, I don't blame you for saying that. But anyways, we will get to that.
We were saying before this episode that like we really weren't sure what each other's power rankings were going to look like.
I can't believe they're so similar.
Yeah, like they ended up being, and it's kind of a problem. Like it feels like anytime we're doing power rankings or a tier list, we always kind of end up on the same thing. And I think this was the first episode where we really thought that we were going to have a lot of differences. I mean, we'll definitely have a lot to discuss when we get to them, but it kind of ended up being the same. But Team Liquid won.
Anyways,
we'll talk about
one last thing I want to say about Golden Guardians before we move on to the next team is I just want to say I think the bot lane looked a lot better this week as well, because they have not looked good so far this year, the Golden Guardians bot lane, and I think that they were the main reason why they won this game. We talked about Newbie on the Janna. His Janna was great. Is it that difficult to hit R when Rel comes in? No, but it's still something that you have to be careful about your positioning and whatnot to not get picked out or to not use the R unnecessarily. So props to him for that, and I still thought Stixay dished out a bunch of damage on the Sivir, so it was nice to see that bot lane perform really, really well.
At least he's hitting R. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Anyways, let's move on. Who's next? We're going up your power rankings or what?
Sure.
We'll go up yours.
We'll go off mine. I had CLG in 9th place. Obviously, Blue Jay has CLG 8th place. Not that I put up the wrong thing. My bad. Not that I have anything wrong with putting CLG at 8 potentially. It's just that I kind of view them sort of similar to Golden Guardians in the fact that they have a lot of holes in their roster, and there have been times they have looked good, but for the majority of the season, this team has just not looked good. I will admit that CLG is looking better, and they're a little bit on the rise, and I think that's good. I'm really happy for CLG. I really wanted Broxa to come and succeed when he's joining CLG. I know we both kind of vocalized our thoughts early on in season 11 that we're actually rooting for CLG a little bit. We don't want to see this team crash and burn, and we don't want to have to spend the whole of 2021 flaming CLG, which is what we did in 2020. But part of it is looking at the team's whole first half of the season, and CLG did not look very good. I do think players like Broxa is helping their team. Finn is looking a lot better, which I will give him. I think Finn had a really rough start to the split, but I think he had actually a really solid week 2. But I think just looking at the whole body of work, I put CLG at 9th.
And I know that we have at least one CLG fan listener because he was in the comment section last week.
Shout out you.
So I'm talking to the CLG fan of last week. Don't panic yet. That's what I'm saying, because we talked about how Golden Guardians had a chance of taking some games off of some other teams. I think CLG, that's been the story of their season, that they could have taken some games off of some of these other teams, but they just haven't been able to close it out. With that said, though, they're getting a lot of early game leads, or at least being competitive in most of their games, which is not something that we saw last year. So, like, this version of CLG is no doubt better than what we saw last year, and so that's something to hold on to. Where I want to discuss, though, is the Pobelter being benched and RJS being put in. Now, RJS has not been the worst mid laner I've ever seen, but he has been a bottom tier mid laner, and I think that he has struggled a fair little bit. So, do you think it's time for Pobelter to go back in? Now, I also want to say one other thing is that in the interview that came out with Broxa today or yesterday, Broxa did say that he didn't that it was not attitude issues. So for people saying
Oh,
that
I didn't know that.
Pobelter could have attitude issues, I certainly thought that's what it would be. I didn't think it was Pobelter underperforming. I thought it had to have been attitude issues, but he said that that was not the case. So I mean, I'm not in the team. I don't freaking know, but that's what he said. And so if there's no attitude issues, well, shouldn't Pobelter be good enough to go slot right back into this roster and play?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually know. I didn't see that, but that's very interesting to hear that.
I thought that too.
It was kind of released that his benching was because of attitude issues. But in terms of
Yeah.
like RJS and his performance, it's kind of been doing like a bit of a decline. I feel like his early on week one performances were actually pretty good. And he was actually seeming to be a very strong laner who obviously made some very rookie mistakes in the mid and late game. I remember in his week one, I think it was in the first game of the season, his Twisted Fate. He started off the game looking really well. It was like 4-0 or something, and kind of just died 4 times in a row in the game, doing some very, we'll call it ambitious TF ultimates into the middle of enemy teams.
Yeah.
But one thing that I'll say about RJS is he actually seems to, like I said, while his performance has been going down, I think his laning is actually pretty good. Where he does struggle, though, is in team fights, which I feel like is a big detriment to being a mid lane player, and specifically in a meta where it's all about like control mages, where the number one priority is staying alive and dishing out damage. And when you're not staying alive, you're therefore not dishing out damage, and you're then just being pretty useless. So if I was CLG at this point, I think I would probably sub Pobelter in because he's an on paper upgrade, and I think with their team being on the rise a little bit, that extra boost could help them out quite a lot.
Yeah, and I think so too, but we can't be too ignorant in saying, like, look, we are not part of scrims, right? So you have to remember that the coaching staff of CLG is seeing what the results are looking like with or without Pobelter, I'm sure, in scrims. And so they have more information to base off of. Maybe Pobelter's absolutely running it down, you know? Um, maybe not. But what I do want to talk about is we're seeing them struggle. Like I mentioned before, we're seeing them struggle in the late game. They're getting leads and they're just throwing. They could have closed that game out against Cloud9, but they decided to stick around in the base and they just wiped, and it looked pretty bad. The thing is, normally when you're seeing late game struggles, so many people come back to, well, you need a veteran shot caller. But it's like, they have that. Like, you have Broxa, you have Smoothie, Wild Turtle. Like, this is something you
And
have.
Finn.
Yeah, and Finn, he was at Worlds last year, right? So like,
Yeah.
Finn is not some noob, you know.
And neither are the rest of them.
So you gotta start to wonder, like, is for that veteran presence. I don't think that could be. That was my initial thought, but I actually don't think you can go with that argument anymore because, well, honestly, I don't think you need any more of a veteran presence. Maybe now that's not saying Pobelter's late game shot calling isn't great because maybe he does have really good comms or really good I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But I'm just saying that I don't think it's, oh, he's a veteran and so he should be put in and that'll fix all their problems. I don't think it's that simple. With that said, I do think that their problems are fixable, and I do think that they can start to close out some of the leads that they're getting.
Yeah. I just think that Pobelter is just a better fit for the meta right now. And I feel like there's such a high priority on mid lane in general in terms of champions and general pressure. We're seeing a lot of like early like mid lane picks. We're kind of seeing like Azir potentially become this like B1 blue side pick. Like a lot of teams are first picking Azir. I think Team Liquid did it one game. Dignitas has been doing it a little bit. I'm trying to think of, and there was another team that first picked Azir this past week. I don't remember who it was, but Azir is becoming a bit of a top tier champion, and you need your old reliable players in the mid lane, I feel like, and Pobelter is one of those guys.
Well, and Azir is probably one of those champions we should have mentioned when we're talking about the meta right now, because yes, we are seeing more and more priority
That
on
champ
Azir,
is correct.
and it's looking good in so many ways. I don't want to go too much down the rabbit hole because we already talked about meta, but basically this champion is looking really good, and it's really good with the rel as well. You're seeing a lot of nice wombos, but I'm sure we'll talk about Azir when we get over to TSM because yeah. Anyways, But I do like what you said before as well about Finn. I think he's starting to look a lot better, and he's starting to find a comfort zone and actually make some outplays in the top lane because he looked pretty bad to start the year. And I mean, not it's not a surprise to me that he's looking better. I knew that he's not that bad of a top laner, and I know that he can look better. And so yeah, good for him. And hopefully we see CLG get some dubs under their belt in the near future.
Okay, enough about CLG. FlyQuest up next. I had them 8th. You had them 9th. Admittedly, I'm a little bit of a FlyQuest believer, so maybe that's partially why I had FlyQuest at 8th. I think they
I'm
have
a
looked.
FlyQuest believer as well. I believe they will finish 9th. I don't
Okay,
think that
fair
they're
enough.
looking really good right now.
One thing I will say
Go ahead.
about
Sorry to cut you off.
FlyQuest in terms of the way that the meta is shifting is I think it actually does hurt FlyQuest because I think Palafox hasn't looked the best on control mages, and Jose Diodo has looked best on the hard farming carry junglers like the Hecarim, even like the Graves. So I do think that the way that the meta is going, it will be a little bit of a nerf to FlyQuest. But my main reason for just mainly putting FlyQuest, at 8th and above CLG was because I think their individual players, on average, have been playing better than the CLG players. Like, would I rather take I'm trying not to be too biased just based on last week, but would I rather have Licorice or would I rather have Finn? I'd rather have Licorice. Would I rather have Jose Diodo or would I rather have Griffin / Broxa? I would take Jose Diodo. Would I rather have Palafox or RJS? I'd take Palafox. And would I rather have FlyQuest bot lane? I would rather have FlyQuest bot lane, honestly. It's just more that, like, I think these teams are actually like pretty equal in terms of their current level, but I do think that like FlyQuest just has a little bit better in terms of like the individual players, and that was my main reasoning for putting them above CLG.
So I actually like that argument because I do think there is some substance to that. The only thing is that I haven't seen FlyQuest being able to get anything going in the early game. And that normally a lot of people point to the jungler. I don't think that's the case here. I think that there's not a lot of leads and not a lot of things to be proactive with on the FlyQuest roster. And that's why I think Jose Diodo's struggling. I don't think it's necessarily a him thing. I think it's a team thing. And I've seen CLG just get way more advantages than I have FlyQuest. And so that's ultimately for me why I actually had CLG ahead. They're just getting a little bit more. They're having more chance at winning games. Now, that doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom for FlyQuest because we have seen some good things, but um, yeah, I don't see too many advantages. I'm not seeing Palafox doing anything really all that special. He's really losing priority most of his lanes and not really able to get around the map. Diamond has looked like a non-factor. Considering this is a meta where there's so many engaged supports, I think we should see a few more plays out of Diamond considering he's on Rel all the time, or Alistair, and we're not really seeing much of that either. Um, this team needs to find some way to be proactive and make plays happen. It just feels like they're getting run over in the early game and then slowly bleeding out, and that's basically been the story of FlyQuest so far this year.
I don't know. You just said that Diamond likes to play those hard and engaged support players. He likes those. He actually hasn't been playing too much of the Rel or the Alistar. We're actually seeing a lot of him like on the Tahm Kench, the Thresh, the Seraphine. He has played some Alistar or Rel games, but I definitely agree with you. Like that's Diamond. Those are Diamond's best champions, and they need to get him on those more. I really didn't like the fasting Senna game that they did against. I don't remember who it was, but I didn't like that. I don't really like putting Johnson on the Seraphine. While I do think they look good having Johnson on the Seraphine, I definitely like
You
Johnson.
sound like Mo2.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mo2 in the live chat.
I like Johnson way better on like those hard farming ADCs. Like put him on the Kai'Sa. Well, just put him on Kai'Sa. Like
While I don't
OP.
mind that argument, I think that Seraphine is so strong right now, and so I actually really like finding a way to put that as part of your comp. We saw
I prefer
away from
I prefer it in the mid and support as opposed to the ADC. Yeah. If I were to choose, I think Seraphine mid is like super underrated. I'm surprised we haven't seen a single game of it in NA because we're seeing a good bit of it in the LEC. Specifically, Niski has been playing a ton of Seraphine mid, and it looks pretty OP.
Yeah, I'm actually with you a little bit there because we're seeing Palafox lose out on a lot of priority mid anyways. And so if you're going to lose priority, you may as well have something that scales and looks great later, like the Seraphine. So I wouldn't mind them throwing it mid either. But yeah, they have put it in the bot lane just about every time they've drafted it. But anyways, yeah, I think that's a really good point.
I don't know. I don't got too much else to say on FlyQuest. I think
Yeah, let's go next.
there's the good and bad with FlyQuest, and I feel like we're seeing a little more of the bad than the good.
Having just talked about the bottom teams of our league, though, I feel much better about them this year than I did last year.
Yeah,
It
it
feels
feels.
like they have a chance of take. Well, clearly they have a chance to take games off of other teams. We saw Golden Guardians do it.
Yeah, the
We
main
saw them beat
thing.
100.
Yeah, like with the bottom teams, I feel like we were just talking about, there wasn't a lot of hope for the bottom tier teams in previous seasons. But like with this season, there are points of power in each roster and players we're looking at that have whose performances have been improving, which I think is really good. You look at Golden
Yeah.
Guardians, Newbie's playing a little bit better, Blazol is playing a little bit better, CLG, Finn is playing a little bit better. Their bot lane's still looking pretty solid. Maybe a swap in the mid can help them. And same with FlyQuest. Jose Dioto's looking pretty good. In specific instances, we're seeing very good games out of players like Licorice or players like Johnson.
Yeah.
And to move
Okay,
on to
let's
another team,
Yeah, let's
which
talk about Immortals. I'm excited to talk about them, not so much because there's anything amazing. I don't think they're going to run over the top teams. But you and I have said that we think out of the development teams, we thought that this was the team that looked best and had the best chance to look good. And hey, man, I'm a big fan of that mid jungle. I think Xerxes looked good. I think too many people are going to remember him getting outplayed by Blabber in that one game. But overall, he's looked pretty good. I've really liked his Hecarim, and I think Insanity's been great. Really underrated. For those listening, guys, keep your eyes on Insanity. He's been quietly having a really good year. I think he's on a 4-5 roster, so it's like I don't think there's too many people that also watch Immortals games, but I'm buying. I'm buying Insanity right now. I think he's looked really, really good.
yeah, Insanity is like one of my favorite players in the LCS ever since the Insanity got the juice meme. Like I'm pulling it up right now.
Insanity got the juice, baby.
Yeah, hold on. It's Immortals logo is getting replaced with Insanity. There we go. This is what we need to be seeing. But yeah, just to get onto Insanity, he's actually been like super underrated in my opinion this season. If you actually go look at his stats, he has some of the best stats out of all of the LCS mid laners. I was writing my thing the other day, but basically Insanity has the second best KDA in the league. This was before Sunday's matches, I believe. But Insanity has one of the best KDAs in the league, one of the highest assists per game out of all mids in the league, and actually has really good early game stats in terms of CSD and then being up or down in golden experience. And I think Insanity is just being slept on by a lot of people. I think if you look at the mid lane pool of North America, we do have some very like quality mid laners, like your Jensens, your Perks, your Power of Evils, and your Demontes even. But to me, Insanity is just like right under that, and he's not too far behind that. I think we saw in Insanity's first summer season, he was definitely a very green player who, he had some flashes of greatness and then also had some very int moments. I remember
He was
like
flipping, baby.
like there was a couple games in the summer split where like the game kind of got thrown by Insanity, like making a bit too aggressive of plays or getting picked off in important late game team fights. But if you like, I would urge people to just go back and like watch some of Immortals games this season and just watch how like good Insanity is playing. I think he's like just a notch under some of the top tier like NA mid laners at this current moment, and he's definitely like a player on the rise for sure.
Yeah, and if people are wondering why are we so excited about this player, this is because when we're talking about teams developing players, this is what we want to see, right? Like he was not a good top or a good mid laner last year. He was probably towards the bottom of North American mid laners, but like Chad is saying, like the stock is rising and he's starting to look really good. This is what people want to see when we talk about developing players. And I think so much of the focus for this team specifically is on their bot lane and their top lane because those are like the rookies, quote unquote. But hey man, Insanity's still a young player and he's still new to the league in my opinion. And I think that we're seeing him improve probably the most on this roster. And I think Immortals, they have something here in the mid lane.
Yeah, I think the main thing to, I guess, play a little bit of devil's advocate with this Immortals roster is I think their consistency has been a bit of an issue because we've seen Immortals play some really good games against these top teams. Like they beat Team Liquid in the first day of the season. They had a really good showing against 100 Thieves this past weekend, but some of their problems have come in just playing teams that they are even equal to. Like we saw them lose early on to Golden Guardians. They struggled against FlyQuest, and it just sort of seems like I feel like once Immortals could find some consistency in their roster and able to just generally, like, I don't know, just be consistent in terms of their play, I think they could actually, contend for a playoff spot for sure.
Yep. And one of the areas where I do think they're struggling right now is I mentioned how people have their eyes on the top lane and the bot lane, but that to me is where this team is struggling. Like there's a reason they're
Hmm.
losing more than they're winning. Like as excited as we are for the mid lane, like they are struggling in other areas. And Revenge has been self-critical himself, saying that like a lot of people are focused on his performance early against Alfari and how he popped
Yeah.
off, but he said himself, he's like, I don't think I'm playing very well right now and I need to get better and so on and so forth. And I think he's right. But again, if it's just like Golden Guardians. We can't expect too much out of these young players, right? It's not like we expect them to go out there and absolutely smash. These are rookies; they're learning a lot, and I do think that we will see them get better. The player that I'm seeing struggle the most, though, is actually Race.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. I saw I don't remember somewhere recently there was a few people actually saying that they thought Race looked really good, but I'm not in that boat honestly. I don't think he's looked that good, and I think Destiny's been very hit or miss. I'll see him make some really nice engage plays, and then I'll see him make some I'm not even close to on the same page as the rest of my teammates plays, like going in while the team is like nowhere near follow up range. So I think that stuff that just gets that gels out over time with just building up some synergy and playing more games with your team. I don't think that that's something that's going to stick with Destiny for long, but it's something that we've definitely seen so far in the early parts of the season, and I think that can get better as well.
Yeah, I agree that their bot lane has been the weakest point on this Immortals roster, and like you said, Destiny is like a little bit hit or miss. I would also say coin flippy. Some of his early games, like he's making a lot of just random plays. Like I'm trying to what was I don't remember who they were playing, but it was like was it maybe against TSM where like Destiny was like threw some random hook and like died in lane or level 2. Like this was like 2 weeks ago, but like
I don't remember.
he made some like really bad play. I don't remember, but like
You're
Destiny,
talking to a goldfish brain, man. I can't remember
yeah.
that.
But basically,
Anyways,
just my point is that Destiny has been a little bit coin flip, and while I do think that we're very high on Immortals and how they're currently looking, I think their bot lane is maybe your point of concern for this roster.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Let's move on to EG, right?
Yep.
EG's next.
We got EG up
Let's see.
next. Kind of similar to Immortals in the sense that they're having some very good performances against top teams, but also losing to a lot of bottom teams. Um, they lost to Immortals, they lost to Dig, they lost to what's the well, I just those are the standout ones. They lost to Immortals and Dig, but then in turn looked so good against teams like C9 and Team Liquid.
Well, I'm just really disappointed in this roster, mostly because like we weren't sure how Impact is going to look joining a new team, and he's been great. But I think the rest of the roster has been performing suboptimally to how we would expect them to perform. Um, Ignar was one of the best engagers last year. His engages on Rakan were fantastic. We haven't seen that so much this year. He's really struggling to find the engage fights that he found no problem last year. And it's not that Ignar's been awful this year, but it's like I've come to have such a high expectation of him because he was so good last year that it's like it's a little disappointing to see him fall off a little bit. I thought Sven Skaren a couple of times this weekend was just hesitating. The one fight specifically in the blue side jungle against TSM, I thought that he could have picked off Sword Art, but he waited so long to engage. And by the time he engaged, TSM was there to follow up, and
Yeah, it
they
was
ended up
so late.
winning.
It was
Like,
the play where he Hecarim ulted the wall and sort of was
yes,
playing Galio. Yeah, I completely agree. It was sort of like
yeah,
EG just couldn't pull the trigger, and once they did, like they were also standing on a ward, so like TSM just kind of knew what was going to happen, and I feel like you replay that and EG pulls the trigger right away. They probably end up winning that fight, and who knows, could win that game because that fight was really the turning point in that game.
yeah. Sven Skaren looked pretty bad in that game as well. There was also the game where TSM was stacked on a brush, and he's sitting there like it's like he knew they were in a brush, but he's sitting there waiting for them to leave or something, and then he's like, maybe I'll just face check it anyways, and he goes and face checks it, and then they ended up giving away a kill. So it's like this. It's really not something that we expect to see out of Sven Skaren, out of a veteran like that. I know he can be better, and that's why I'm so disappointed with this roster. You have like one of the best case scenarios for your top laner because Impact has looked so good on so many different picks. but the rest of the team is lacking. And I thought that if we were going to see Impact play to the level that he has been, I thought that we would see the rest of the team follow suit and maybe be one of the contenders to go to Worlds. But the way we're seeing them play right now, I don't think they're there yet. That doesn't mean they can't be, but I just think they're underperforming right now, and I think they should be better than what their record is.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it already, but in my opinion, I think Ignar has actually been the weakest player on this EG roster so far. I would say it's between Sven Skaren or Ignar, but
definitely, honestly, definitely after his first week. His first week was great, but since then, I don't really.
I think he's been all right, but I don't know. The main thing for me with Ignar is just like you said. A lot of people were very high on Ignar after his summer season with FlyQuest, and moving on to this spring season, I think he actually looked pretty good in the lock-in tournament. But similar to Deathly, his performance has been decreasing. He hasn't really been finding those engages. One thing that I would say is kind of weird is I feel like Rel is kind of like the perfect champion for Ignar, and I don't.
Yeah.
If my memory serves me correct, I don't think he's played a single Rel game. And I don't know if that's because maybe the champ is banned against him all the time.
It is banned a lot. I just don't. I can't remember.
It's just surprising to see that we've never seen a Rel game out of Ignar, just because like that champion should be right in his wheelhouse.
What I do know is that you could always rely on Ignar to find an engage last year, and I don't think we've seen that this year. That's been the big change for me, and he's got to turn it around, right? Like he's got to. He was so good at finding the pick or finding the team fight that they needed last year. Hopefully we see that change, but for now, we got them in the 6th spot in the bottom half, which I didn't think we would have EG there.
It was just really hard.
Let's talk about Jizuke a little bit too, because Jizuke is actually he's been exactly what we've been expecting as far as
let's go
flipping that coin, baby. Isn't it amazing? Like we've talked about this for the last couple of weeks, but it still doesn't get any less amazing how a guy can be so good and then be so bad from play to play. It's not even from game to game. It's from play to play. It's unbelievable what kind of player Jizuke is. It will say his laning phase has been great. He usually has priority, and so I think that that's definitely where his strength is. It's just about not being able to hold back and going for that risky play later on where he gets punished. I think that that's been his downfall.
He was asserting his dominance in that game where he was playing Lucian and diving tower. I was all about that.
Was that last week? Last week when that was last week against Dignitas, was it? Or
yeah.
When he was diving
He was playing Dignitas, but yeah, like you didn't see that game.
It's so sad we didn't get to do an episode last week because that would have been so fun to talk about. That. Anyways,
but basically, if you don't know what we're talking about, Jizuke kind of ran it under tower 2 times against Saligo in an attempted dive, and died both times to the tower, which was pretty interesting. And they ended up losing that game, and everyone was kind of memeing him for it. But I don't know, it just felt that I just didn't really know where to place EG against sort of like Immortals and their inconsistent performances, playing well against some of the top teams, but also playing, not so great against some of the bottom teams.
Yeah. And your boy came in, he checked that he's played 2 Rel games and he's 1-1 on it. So he's played a couple of them.
I guess they just didn't stick out to me because like I can't even remember like what game that was or when it happened.
You know what I find? This is a little bit off topic, but I find this year it is so hard to recall all of the games with that one extra day. Like now there's 3 games per team this year. It's like it's so hard to remember everything. Plus watching the LCK, watching the LEC, watching the LPL, it's so hard to keep up with all this stuff. But anyways, that's just a little side note there. Anything else on EG, or should we talk about Dignitas?
Yeah, we'll flip up to the top half. Just for the record, the website that I was making this on doesn't have the updated Dignitas logo. But
blame JNT, it's all his fault. He can't find the updated Diggy logo.
Well,
by the way, a little fun fact.
Logo.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody knows that. That's the name of the new logo is Diggy. That's his name.
He's got a name.
I was so confused because I saw Dignitas tweeting out like #Diggy, and I'm like, are they changing their short form name from Dig to Diggy? But it's like, oh, that's the name of the little dude, the little alien bomb, whatever you want to call that thing. Anyway, so his name is Diggy, Digi. Anyways,
one thing I think
seems freaking fun to watch, man.
One thing I want to say just before we get into the top 5 is it felt like when we were discussing what we were gonna do and then like how we thought our power rankings were gonna go, it felt like numbers 1 to 5 you could put in any order and make a solid argument for, and it would be difficult to it would be difficult to argue that because
it'd be difficult to say that it's absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
Like there is no wrong or right in these teams.
Yeah, there's been so much up and down.
The same top 5.
Yeah, it's
We
weird.
thought that we were going to be all over the place. We thought we were going to be different. I really didn't expect you to have TL number 1, but we'll get to that in a bit. Okay, let's talk Dignitas, because obviously they're cursed because Dardoch tried to play a different jungler and they lost. And that is the depth of that story right there. There's no more.
That's why they lost. They picked Kane again, so they lost. It's simple math, actually.
In more of a serious note, though, this team is looking good, man. And they were talking about it on the LCS analyst desk about whether this team is a contender or whether not a contender. I still think it's too early to say. I don't think you can play 9 games and decide that a team is a contender or not. But I definitely think they're in the right direction. If I had to go with one or the other for now, I would say they are a contender. But I still think it's a little bit early for that.
Yeah, it feels just like with Dignitas, like pretty much I would say every player on their team is playing above expectations. That's how I would sort of classify this Dig roster. Like, I don't think people were expecting Fake God to be this good. I think he's actually been a really great top laner. I'd put him in the top half of LCS top laners. Dardoch, I think, there was a lot of coin flippiness in his gameplay in 2020, and that was something that people were potentially worried about for this Dignitas roster, especially considering they had brought in Fake God and Saligo, two perceived weak players. You add a potentially coin flippy jungler to that equation, and who knows where the fuck that's going. But Dardoch's been pretty solid doing his like A to Z jungle challenge. The main person that I think has been very good for Dignitas is actually Saligo in the mid lane. I think he's been looking really, really good. Similar to Insanity, has pretty good stats actually in terms of CSD and up in golden experience early on in laning phase. I think one thing that we are seeing right now in mid lane is that like early laning phase is really, really important in the mid lane, especially for looking for potential drag fights, herald fights, and then bot and top lane dives, which the early game has just become so prevalent in League of Legends nowadays. Like doing well in the laning phase is just really important, and I think Saligo's been doing a good job of that.
The early game decides probably like 90% of games, unless CLG is on the rift.
Or Golden Guardians.
or Golden Guardians. But honestly, though, the early game does matter a lot. But the only thing that I actually want to challenge a little bit is you said that all the players are better than expectation. Not for me personally, just because I had high expectations of Afromu because I thought Afro looked great last year. And I think that he's looked pretty good this year as well. And so that's why I don't actually think that, like, I think people are still sleeping on Afro for too long. He's been good, guys. He was great last summer, and I think he's been good this year as well. So I don't think that there's like this to me isn't a huge surprise that Afromu's looking pretty good. He has made a few mistakes. I still think he was a little bit better last summer, but overall he's been pretty good, and I think that he's a big part of why Dignitas is looking good.
I guess one thing I will say to that is I guess I was expecting Afromu to look a little worse, specifically because he was losing Johnson and getting what we thought was a downgrade in the bot lane. So I guess I'm kind of attaching that as a duo lane because I think their duo lane has been playing better than expectations. But I guess that's been
fair. Actually, that's a really good.
That's been more on Neo, who I think has also been coming up pretty huge. Specifically, these last 2 weeks has had a actually really good last couple weeks.
Well, when you bring in 3 players like that from Academy, you would have to figure that one of them would be a liability at some point, right? And it hasn't really felt like either of them have been a liability. They've all looked pretty good in their roles. Saligo did have 1 or 2 maybe bad games, but for the most part, he's looked really, really good. His year's been great. His spacing, his auto spacing isn't so good. If you remember back to the play with Jizuke again, he almost ran it a little bit, but that's a nitpicky thing. And overall, the team's looking very good. I can't defend Dardoch and some of his out there picks, right? I can't do it. I can't defend when he plays like Rengar, for example.
You're too stuck on the Kane and the Mundo, dude. He's all about.
I don't mind the Kane. I don't mind.
Sorry,
the Kane.
I meant to say Rengar. I meant to say Rengar.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, because the thing is, I like that he has a big champion pool. I think there are times for those out there picks, if you will. But I just don't think that they're necessarily picking them in the right times, and that's why I'm not a huge fan of it. But for the memes, let's freaking go. It's been a lot of fun. And someone saying Mundo top tier, I don't mind Mundo actually. The more I see it, the more I'm like, oh, maybe I didn't give this champion enough credit that I actually should have, because I have seen him look really good in other regions. I want to say it was LCK that I was watching it last. Like I said, I can't freaking remember anymore. I've been watching too many games, but yeah, not a bad pick.
One thing I'll say about the Mundo is I actually we didn't talk about it, but I think that champion will sort of get nerfed because of the jungle changes. One thing that Mundo is just pretty good at, he actually has a really good early clear and is good at clearing a lot of camps due to the interaction with his E and then like the talisman burn that you get on camps, which is what makes him like kind of just gives him the ability to jungle. And with the XP nerfs, the champ is going to be a lower level. It's going to have, it's not going to spike up to 11 as fast, and then in turn, like, just won't scale as well. And I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like we're not going to see any more Mundo post jungle nerfs.
Just when we were starting to see a little bit of Mundo, patch 11.4 has to come in and just slam them back down to the ground again. Mind you, we don't know that for sure, but I think you're probably right where it's probably going to hurt Mundo.
Has Mundo even been played like elsewhere? Like,
yeah, he got played in LCK and then he's been played in LCS. He's probably only got like 3 or 4 games played on the year, honestly. It's probably not a lot.
4 in Korea, 1 in EU, 1 in NA.
There you go. So he's got 6 games then.
Yeah, there you go.
But anyways, I want to see it a little bit more. I know some friends of ours that wouldn't like me saying that, but I don't care. I want to see some Mundo in the jungle. You want to talk about a 100 Thieves?
Yeah, we'll go into a 100 Thieves. This was
so
I feel like this has been.
Yeah, go ahead.
They've had the biggest drop off in the last week, is what I'll say.
I was thinking of putting them number 1, and then this weekend happened, and I was like,
yeah.
Oh,
to me, I think they were probably, for me, they were probably 2 had last weekend not happened.
Yeah. I would have probably had them 1, honestly, if I'm being completely honest. They looked really lackluster this weekend. Where should we start? Do you want to start? Because I think some days performing lower than expected. And I think Demonte. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I kind of just completely agree. I think their solo laners have been the weakest members of their team. One thing, Demonte is getting, just the way that the mid lane meta is shifting, less about your roaming mid laners and more about your control mages. Not to say that I think Demonte is bad on the control mages, but when Demonte's at his best, it's on the TF, it's on the Galio, and I think he's just been knocked below like a notch because of that change.
Yeah. And that's the narrative that we keep hearing, right? That's always been the criticism of Demonte, well, for this year specifically, but also a little bit last year as well, is that his control mages aren't that great and he's better on the Galios and the TFs. I'm still not sure if I'm ready to say that yet, but he definitely did look bad this weekend, but I thought he looked bad on pretty much everything he played. I was not a fan of the Zhonya's rush, and you and I talked about this a little bit. I don't mind that he goes Seekers because he has the Tristana mid who's kind of just shitting on him. But I don't know why he decided to trade level 1 against a Tristana.
That was troll. He lost half his HP and had to burn a corrupting pot shard before the lane even started.
He screwed himself in the lane. Like, he was the one that was pushed up. Was he? He was able to not take that trade. Let's say that. He didn't have to take that trade and he decided to. And he kind of screwed himself right level 1 and then ended up rushing for the Zhonyas. Now, I think that you should go for the Ludens, honestly. I think that you're going to need the damage. He was the main AP threat. I don't think they had another AP damage threat in that game. So I didn't really like that he went and finished the full Zhonyas. If you are playing something like Lilia, yeah, by all means. Like, you want to flash in there, Q, use your ultimate, and then you Hourglass. That's a Lilia first item rush, or at least I'm okay with it. With the Orianna, you need to be able to spam your abilities, and you want the mana that you get from the Ludens, right? I think it's 500 or 600 mana or something. It's enough mana to do something with. It's enough mana to do something with, and you get more AP on the item as well. Again, I don't mind going the Seekers because he was getting crapped on in lane against Tristana, so I'm fine with that. But I was a little bit perplexed with that. What else was there? There was the play where Sword Art ganks mid, and Power of Evil just puts his gravity field right beneath him on Victor against the Syndra, and you need to flash out of that if you're going to get stunned by that, because I think Sword Art was already showing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he showed, like, and then just like flash W'd him like after he got stunned by the gravity field, and then he was just dead.
Yeah, and like, I don't know.
Kind of lost.
That to me, like, that's something. So it's a good play for Power of Evil. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, he saw that that he was going to walk forward to try to grab some CS, and he punished him with the gravity field. But you should know that the enemy is going to use their abilities. I know that's kind of a forehead thing to say, but nonetheless, you still have to do that. And I thought there were some really uncharacteristic mistakes by Demonte. I didn't think he looked very good. Yeah, I think he'll get better. I think it was just a bad weekend, but to me, he was definitely the worst performing player on 100 Thieves this weekend, and I think he's the biggest reason why we saw them struggle this weekend specifically.
Yeah, I definitely would say Demonte struggled. For me, it was more of a Sunday issue. We already discussed it a little bit when we were, I forget what we were talking about. We were talking about Sunday's Jace
Yeah.
in their game against, was it TSM? Yes? They're
Yep.
playing Jace against Nar. And, we were talking a little bit just how Sunday was kind of misplaying a bit early game, missing a lot of his early JCQs, which then made it difficult for them to execute an early tower dive because of how healthy Nar was. But I think, Sunday just had a bad week in general. He didn't,
Yeah.
in my opinion, he didn't look good in any of their games. I didn't think he looked great in the Immortals game. It definitely didn't look good in either the TSM or the Golden Guardians games. But what I would say is that their solo laners have definitely been uh, struggling, specifically last week. I think
Well, and
to talk about the other roles just a little bit, I think Closer, FBI, and Huhi have been playing really, really well for the most part. I think, we were discussing this just by ourselves during this weekend of LCS, but I would argue that Huhi is actually, 100 Thieves' best player and has been looking really, really good this season.
yeah, even he had some odd plays this weekend that I didn't think looked really good either.
Had a
But
pretty good,
again, I still think this is a team where you could consider every player being towards the top in their role.
yep,
And that's something that we didn't see this weekend. But I want to stay on the topic of Someday for a little bit because this was a player last year, pretty much the whole year. Everyone said, myself included, like he is the guy that's going to carry when they win, and that he was kind of being held back by some of his teammates because the 100 Thieves roster last year was not so great. We saw Someday performing really well, and a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people had him as the best top laner in the league last year. And so you would think that with a new roster of 4 players coming in that all have experience together and being a good team, you would think this is the perfect opportunity for Someday to flex on some kids and show exactly what he can do. And we haven't really done that. I will say he did actually get a lead against the Nar yesterday, whenever it was, with the Jace.
Saturday.
But you need more than that. Of course, you should get a lead against the Nar. It's a really good counter pick. And I don't like to be so nitpicky on just landing skill shots, but he was missing a lot of skill shots. And to me, that was the reason why they couldn't capitalize on diving. Every time they went to try to pull off a dive top, Nar is sitting there full health under tower. And it's like, you can maybe give some credit to Hooney, but you need to be able to poke that guy out and then dive. That's what you want to do. And we saw them roam top level 3, I want to say, for a dive early on. But the Gnar is full HP because of so many missed combos from the Jace. And I think that if he was able to poke him out first, those dives go a lot differently and the game goes a lot differently. There was a lot of criticism that this isn't the way they're supposed to draft and this isn't the way we see 100 Thieves play normally. While I do agree that's true, I have no problem with them trying something different and trying to just smash the top lane and try to win that way. I think that is more than okay to play that style. I just think they misexecuted, and I think that if you give them that same opportunity to do it again in future weeks, I think they're actually able to pull it off. We just didn't see it this weekend.
Yeah. I don't know. It just feels like everyone came into the season with a very high expectation of Sunday because he was finally getting like a very good roster to play around. The whole argument around Sunday is that he hasn't had the best players around him during his time here in North America. And while he is a top player, he hasn't necessarily been like the top of the top due to the rest of the team holding him back. But I don't think this is necessarily the best start for Sunday in terms of his argument that like, oh, I'm the best top laner. You give me good team now. I'm going to carry because, in
Yeah.
my opinion, he's been the worst performing player on 100 Thieves.
I still think mid, but I don't think that you're out there. Like I think that it's possible that it has been someday. I don't think it's obvious. I will say that I also thought closer had a little bit more impact last year as well. You mentioned that the bot lane and closer has looked pretty good overall. I agree with that, but I do think that closer can look a little bit better. But again, you need your laners to be performing well for the jungler to look good, right? So it's not always so black and white of, oh, closer's playing good or closer's playing bad. It is a team game, and I know we say that all the time, but it's true, right? Like you need your lanes to be able to perform well and to get the lanes in good spots and have priority and all these things, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. What we do know is that 100 Thieves can look better, and I still think they will. But after what we saw last weekend, I had to bump them down to 4 from the 1 spot that I would have had them in the previous week.
Jungle diff is lane diff.
Sure,
Okay,
coming from a jungler.
Yep, exactly. We'll move on to TSM next.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
excited for TSM, man. They turned around their season. We thought they were an absolute dumpster fire. And now I do think that they're not maybe amazing because, again, they could have lost that 100 Thieves game if the execution was better from 100 Thieves side. This team is looking like night and day compared to what we saw at the start of the year, man. It
for
is
sure.
unreal how different they look, right?
Imports,
Oh,
imports,
yeah.
imports, imports.
Forgot to say imports, 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 imports.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think TSM has improved so much in such a quick fashion when we look at their locking games and even just their first 4 games of the season. I think they could easily have been 0-4 within the first 4 games of the season had they not have played against, CLG and Golden Guardians, who are notorious for throwing their leads, which in both games, that's what happened. They had big leads
Yep.
against TSM and then threw them. So TSM could easily be sitting in a much worse position than they are, but in these last 2 weeks have looked so much better. I think the main 2 players I want to talk about in terms of their performances have been Sword Art and PoE. PoE is just doing all the heavy lifting for TSM. This is kind of like his meta right now. Like, it's a control mage meta, and that's the PoE meta. Like, all of his top tier champions basically are at like 1 through 4 in terms of mid lane priority, like Syndra, Azir, Orianna, and Victor. And like, when you think of Power of Evil, those are probably the 4 champions I would associate with them.
He's having some highlight plays, eh?
Oh
Like
yeah,
he's hitting the highlight reel, baby, on the Azir.
for
He's
sure.
looked really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what else did I want to talk about? Oh, I wanted to talk about Spica because you and
Speaker.
I stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but at least I know myself. I had really, really high expectations for Spica coming into this year. I talked way back in summer last year that I thought Spica could have been the best jungler in the league this year. I thought that with some more time to develop, he was just getting better and better as the year went on. I thought that with an off season to work on some mechanics and work on some pathing and all that stuff that you would work on as a jungler. And I thought that coming into this year, with more experience and more time to develop, I thought that he was going to be the best jungler in the league. Now, he hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been that great either. And you know what's weird is that it started off as kind of a meme on the Double If Co stream that Spica can't play Olaf because he says he doesn't really like the Olaf pick that much and whatnot. But I actually think it's kind of become a little bit true. I think he has been better on other picks that aren't the Olaf.
I
I
agree.
still want to see more sample size because we haven't seen that many Olaf games. But I do think that he's struggling just a little bit in the jungler, and I think that if he gets better, TSM is going to be an absolute powerhouse.
One thing I'll say about what I thought of Spica going into the season is I wasn't too high on the TSM roster to begin with. So my thoughts were that it was going to be on Spica to carry TSM. But after everything that's now happened, it's pretty much been, I would say, the opposite actually. And it's been the rest of the players actually playing very well. And I wouldn't say, like you said, I wouldn't say Spica's been performing poorly, but I would say he's a little bit kind of like hanging on, like he's just like riding on, like he's not doing a
Yep.
whole lot. Like, I think they've been getting a lot better play out of Huni, they've been getting a lot better play out of Power of Evil, and I think Sword Art it's like night and day comparison to his lock-in performances where he was just like throwing at random engages, inting at random times, where he's been looking very good. I think back to 2 weeks ago when he was playing Pantheon, he had those 2 Pantheon support games and he looked really good in that. And I think he's continuing to having a lot of impact early on to the game. I think one thing that we mentioned in our previous episode was how Doublelift was kind of flaming Sword Art in terms of his roam timings on support, and how he was like just doing a bit of a comparison to Vulcan and how support timings work and whatnot. And I think he's been doing a lot better in terms of his early roaming. We saw in that EG game, it's like level 6 and he's like already up in that top side and ready to counter that EG play that they made. And we talked about EG's hesitance to make that play, but Sword Art just like kind of carried that fight on Galio after Svenskeren ulted into him by like Eing in response. He got like I think a 2 or a 3-man W after that. But I think Sword Art's been playing really well.
So I have a theory as to why we're seeing more pressure around the map from Sword Art, and I think it just comes down to priority because we saw that lane struggle a lot. That bot lane, like Lost and Sword Art, were really struggling, getting pushed in all the time, losing NCS, sitting under tower, and not being able to get around the map, which is what Sword Art wants to do. That bot lane has looked so much better in lane. They're actually contesting CS and contesting the enemy bot lane and actually skirmishing a little bit, and they're not just giving up the lane for free. And I think it's allowed Sword Art to be able to roam when they get that priority. I think that that's something that has helped a lot, and that's why I think we're seeing more pressure out of Sword Art. because we are seeing him around the map. We saw him punish the Jace in the 100 Thieves game. We saw him. By the way, Huni was baiting. Like Huni was the perfect bait in that game. So many times sitting there on the Gnar, someday wanted to engage on him, and he did. As soon as he did, every single time Sword Art was there to punish. And I think that's one of the reasons why TSM was able to take that game. So a really good job from Huni and Sword Art working together to bait in the engage from Someday and take him out and get more advantages. So that to me is the reason I think as to why TSM, one of the reasons actually why TSM is looking better, honestly.
You could say Huni is a master baiter.
Haha.
Just wanted
Nice.
to slide that in there. Yeah, no, it's difficult because I think it had TSM won their game against Dignitas on Sunday, there could be a real argument for putting them as the number one team in the league, and it'd be a bit difficult to discuss argue that. I think the only other team you could argue them against is either Team Liquid or C9, but C9 had just lost to Team Liquid and TSM beat Team Liquid. I know we're gonna talk about both of those teams, but it was very hard to sort of predict this top five. I would say especially this top three, because it's really weird just in terms of how it's resulted that, Team Liquid beat 9, but TSM has beaten Team Liquid. And somebody in the chat mentioned it before, but we have like the LCS circle of suck, which just means that like you can put all the LCS teams in a circle, and it just works that like this team has beat this team beat this team, and it's just like it's pretty funny.
Rock, paper, scissors effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, circle of sucks, one way to go about it.
It was on Reddit. That's what they called it. It was the circle of suck.
Sure. The one last thing that I want to mention about this team that's a little bit different from the TSM that we saw last year is everyone knew TSM was going to roam top level 3 and dive when they had Broken Blade, Spica, and Bjergsen getting the priority roaming top. That's basically what their plan was. The one thing that I'm noticing different this year is that TSM has not been the first team to make a play in a lot of their games. And that's why I think that they're struggling a little bit in that aspect. But I think that if TSM is the first one to pull off some aggressive plays, obviously they need to be calculated. You can't just, we're diving everywhere, forehead. It doesn't necessarily work. But if they do find ways to be more proactive and make those plays around the map, I think TSM could be the best team in the league if we start to see them do that, rather than be the second team to make a play in the game. If they're the first team and they get good at pulling off those dives, this is a real contender. And so even though we have them 3, they could be a 2 or a 1, but it's too difficult to say right now.
It kind of just feels like the reactive play style is just like the default TSM. I feel like that's just what they end up defaulting to, especially that Bjergsen's now the head coach. He probably like recognized early in the season, like, hey, we're screwing up a lot of these early, engagements and plays. So like, let's just kind of go back to like what I know. And then probably that's what he, emphasized to the rest of his team. And I think, to be honest, it actually works out pretty well with their current roster, because I think Lost and Power of Evil have been really great in terms of like late game scaling champions. And, people always kind of flamed or memed TSM for like always being that slow reactive team. But, if it works, it works.
Yeah. Cloud9?
Yeah, we got C9 at 2. In my opinion, would have been number 1 had they have taken down Team Liquid. Who actually knows where we'd put Team Liquid if they had actually lost to Cloud9? But it was really difficult for me to put C9 at 2 and then in turn put Team Liquid at 1. Mainly, I did this because I just have more confidence, I feel like, in Team Liquid than Cloud9 in terms of like, we're playing a match and I got to bet money to like win the game. I feel like I was more likely to put my money on Team Liquid than C9, and that was kind of my main reasoning for putting C9 2 and TL1, was just that like, if I had to put my money on the line, I'd probably put it on Team Liquid as opposed to C9 right now.
So I actually thought that the TLC9 game, mind you, there was some fumbles, we'll call it, in the mid game that I think that both teams need to clean up if they want to be good teams. But I still thought the start of that game was just very well played by both teams. There was the dive play that happened in the bot lane, and C9 tried to answer with a TP, and they ended up not completely wiping, but they gave up 4 kills or something like that. Anyways, it was a really nice proactive play by Team Liquid, but the fight was actually really close to swinging the other way. It to me was like one of the deciding team fights of the game, even though it was so early. But to me, I just thought that both teams played that specific instance of the game really well, and one team came out on top. Like, I didn't think that it was TL absolutely smashing Cloud9 or Cloud9 looking awful or anything like that. I thought that the macro was pretty good out of both teams, and so that's why I figured I had to go 1-2 with these guys. And because Team Liquid came out on top, I ultimately went with them. But we can't forget that Team Liquid's still not looking that great. We will get to them in a second, though. One of the other things that I'm still struggling with Cloud9 is the top lane. I think it was you that mentioned to me like not Perks, Fudge has kind of transitioned into the lose top lane gracefully kind of role, and that's what we've seen most recently.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that you can do that only and be a top laner in this league. I think that you need to be able to do more than that. And when we saw him on the Camille's and those kind of picks earlier in the year, I don't think we got enough out of him. So I'm not ready to put Fudge up there yet. I definitely think he's looking better than we saw in Lock-In, but to me, he's still just not that great of a top laner. And I think he's definitely the biggest hole that this lineup has in them. And I actually thought that one of the reasons why I thought TL could have beaten Cloud9 was just through top diff. I thought that Alfari was just going to absolutely dump on Fudge. However, the game was decided at a different part of the map. But yeah, definitely still a little bit worried for Fudge up there. It's still early, I know, but I haven't seen anything that really blows me away or impresses me all that much.
Yeah, one thing I'll say about Cloud9 in that Team Liquid game is it really felt like, in my opinion, they just got out drafted pretty hard. It was kind of a bit weird, just the way that the draft ended up going. Cloud9 actually picked Skarner and Thresh into Tahm Kench, which are Tahm Kench counters both of those champions, which was kind of weird. And also, like I said before, I didn't really like the Lucian mid pick that they went with in that game because it just felt like early game or bust for Cloud9 the way that they drafted that comp. It basically just meant like they had to win early game and they had to get both of their AD champions ahead as to not just get, kind of just outscaled by the enemy team due to them having very low magic damage. They pretty much had no magic damage. They have a tank Skarner and a tank Gragas. And those champions, while they do magic damage, they don't do a lot of them. So it just felt like once Cloud9 fell behind in that game early, it was very difficult to come back. But I would say that they did actually make a lot of good plays in that mid and late game. We kind of also mentioned that could be a bit of a fumble on the Team Liquid side. But Cloud9 actually had some pretty good team fighting in the mid and late game, down 5K, 8K, 10K gold to almost claw their way back into the game.
That's one thing I'll always give Cloud9 credit for is I do think they are the best team in the league at playing from behind. They will not hesitate to go for a play and take a risk if they are losing. They are the ones that will start that Baron and will flip that freaking thing if they're losing the game.
Yeah, like
that's something I get really fired up about this topic. It's something you need to do. And we see the lower teams in the LCS, they chicken out and they run for it as soon as they get contested. It's like, what are you starting up Baron for? Do you think the other team's not going to contest it? Of course they will. You're on Baron and they know you're desperate. Of course they're going to contest. So I don't know. I just see it too often where I see teams pull off the objective, whether it be the Soul Dragon or the Elder Dragon or the Baron or whatever it may be. And Cloud9 is that team that will flip it, and they do a really good job at giving themselves a chance in games where they are behind. And that's one of the reasons why I actually put C9 at 2 is even if they are falling behind, they're not out of a game,
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. When we were watching that game, we both thought that like flipping the Baron there is like it's the right play to do. You had just won a team fight. You killed off 2 members of the enemy team. One of them did have TP up, and it was Jensen who was like, yeah, he was playing Orianna, had the TP, was able to rejoin the fight. But we both thought that that was the correct play. Like Cloud9 at the time was I think down 8K in gold, and after killing 2 members, like I think flipping Baron was the best play there.
They died though, right?
Yeah,
if I remember,
they got wiped, and like obviously your average Twitch chat viewer is just gonna be like, what the fuck Cloud9 doing? Like they're just like sticking on this Baron and all gonna die for
Baron,
it.
what? Yeah.
But like it's the
what
correct
are you doing
play to
Baron
go for.
lol. Yeah. No, I completely agree.
The other thing, just to kind of flip back to Fudge a little bit, because the one thing that I'll say about Fudge is, while yes, I do think he is the problem for Cloud9, and while losing gracefully is not necessarily a winning strategy, one thing I'll say is they just seem to have just completely put Fudge on an island and are now giving him almost 0 resources. I think early on in the split, while we did see him on the Jaxes, the Camille's, and yes, he necessarily didn't always have the best success on it, I think Cloud9 was still doing they were doing a lot of great things when they did send some jungle resources topside. And it's basically turned into these last 2 weeks. Fudge has just been put on Gragas duty. He played
Gragas duty.
He played 3 games of Gragas this weekend. Played 2 games of Gragas last weekend, and we're pretty much just seeing like he's kind of just getting the Dyrus treatment, where he's just being left to his lonesome, not involved in the game plan whatsoever. Occasionally TPs down to fights, and majority of the time he's behind and just doesn't have that great of an impact on the map. I really would like to see Cloud9 either get Fudge, like get him counterpick, or just like try to get a strong early first pick for him. Like maybe you can get, like if you can ever get your hands on a Renekton, grab a Renekton for Fudge. Like we need to see if this guy can actually play. Like he did get memed on pretty hard in the lock-in tournament for his poor performances, and he did have some very poor performances against Team Liquid and against 100 Thieves. But since then, it's just kind of Cloud9 is just feels like refused to like even let him even put one hand on the wheel. He's just like sitting in the fucking back seat in the like the baby car seat. That's what it feels like. Like they won't let him touch the damn wheel.
Well, I actually wonder if the jungle changes might change that. With if in theory junglers will be ganking more. That's what we think or expect to happen. Maybe we do see him on something that they can carry, and maybe they do try to gank top more often. I don't know. That's to be determined kind of stuff. But I definitely agree with you. They're just throwing him on Gragas right now. I'm okay with that. If Cloud9 thinks that's the best way to win, no problem with that. That's fine. But yeah, for me to put you in the top half of top laners, I think you need to show a little bit more than that. And I think that he has been in the bottom half of top laners still in the league, despite looking a little bit better. But
I've just now realized through our entire C9 segment, I've had the TSM logo up.
Oh, whatever.
So, unlucky.
Oh, we're just clickbaiting. That's all it is.
If
you want to see that TSM logo,
Yeah, okay. Surprise, surprise. We both have Team Liquid #1. I kind of already mentioned it a little bit, but with all the like hectic shit that's going on in the NALCS, it just feels like my money is just on Team Liquid. Like they just feel like the safest team. Like I don't know. Like while they have been losing games, they're 5-4. They're actually below both all of Cloud9, TSM, 100 Thieves, and Dignitas in terms of the standings. I don't know. It's just really hard to tell. I think TL have the best individual players on their teams, not necessarily all roles, but like all of it together, they have the best individual players in terms of skill. I still think their late game is still one of the best in the league, while they did fumble against EG. It's really hard to say, but I have Team Liquid 1.
So I want to start with the pessimistic side with TL, because there are some things that do worry me about this team. Yes, I know I have the #1, but the things that worry me when I hear Jensen and Tactical talking about burnout already in Travis Gafford interviews. We're February 22nd. That's really early in the season. It was even early. It was like last week. That's really early that we're hearing talk about burnout, and that makes me a little bit Monka-S on this team. Because I don't think you want to hear any of your players talking about burnout this early into the year. It's a long year, man. It's a long schedule. You got lots of games to go. Burnout is something that's worrisome. And with that, I will say that pretty much, well, I would say mid and bot have been performing lower than I would have expected. Do I think Jensen's still great? Yes, I do. But I think we've seen a little bit more out of him in the past. He's getting caught out in situations that I just don't think he should. I think even he admitted to that. And then also the bot lane, I don't know, like Core JJ and Tactical, their positioning has been really, really bad, man. Sometimes dying in lane, like that's something I would never expect them to see happen all that often. And they still have that clutch factor. And so that's why it's still easy for me to put them #1, because they are still ultimately able to find wins, but clearly not as many as they used to.
Yeah, I definitely think that their bot lane has been struggling. What I would say is Core JJ's gone from like godly to good, and Tactical's gone from like good to average. Because I definitely think that Tactical has actually really struggled in this season. Even in Team Liquid wins, we're seeing him die just a lot in general, whether that's getting picked off in the mid and late game or just like dying early on in lane. In terms of Core JJ, I still think he's been playing decently. I don't think he's been insane MVP level that he's been. If I were to actually probably pick an MVP into this season, it would probably be Blabber or Power of Evil. Those would be like my numbers 1 and 2. I'd probably put Blabber at 1, PoE at 2. But
I think I would put Blabber at 1, honestly.
yeah. But it just feels like Core JJ is not like going God mode right now. But I have all the confidence in the world that Team Liquid is gonna get better, and Core JJ will go back to being a god.
Me too. And this is where I want to talk more positively about TL. I think that they will continue to get so many leads in the laning phase, but I
They
think that
just
they'll be able
dick
to hold on
kids
to
in
them.
the early game. Holy.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Alfari just like shits on kids. Like
To me, like Alfari coming over was like, this is good news, right? But I always worry about when an import comes over, because we've seen a lot of variance with how imports perform when they're new to a league, right? We saw Crown not perform all that well. We
oh
saw
my
what
god,
else?
Crown.
Even best in the West, right? When Sven and Mithy came over, they didn't look so hot either. That took some time for Sven to become a top 80 carry again. And so you do see like some of these like really good players come over and not look that great. I don't think that's been a worry at all anymore with Alfari. He's been, for the most part, really, really good, getting so many advantages, and that's what you should expect. But it's never a guarantee. But that's what we've seen, and that's one area that I'm really happy with. And then also we talked about the jungle changes that could help Santorin. I think they will, and I think that
For
we're going to
sure.
see Santorin start to take over games in the early phase. And with early game advantages, I don't think that this team can continue to throw their leads. I think they're too good for that. Um, yeah, and I just don't think it's going to continue to happen. Watch me eat my words now. Maybe next week I'll have TL lower on my power rankings or something like that. I don't know, but so far, there is some stuff to worry about with this team. But I agree with you when you say like, is there a team that I have most confidence in? It's this one, because I think in every role they have a good player that can turn it around.
Yeah.
Just yeah.
Well, no, I was just reading the live chat for a sec because I thought you were gonna
So
say
was
something.
I.
But just to respond to something the live chat who was saying, where I'm getting my stats from. I get them from Game of Legends. So
What
there.
is it? GameOfLegends.com
Yeah,
or
it's just
.org or
it's
.gg or .what?
gameoflegends.com. That's what I get all their stats from. They're
Yeah.
a really good website. I didn't actually know about them until about like last year when I heard. I think it was like Papa Smithy was talking about it or something. But
Mm.
if you ever need any stats on pretty much anything from any player from any region in the world, that site's pretty OP.
And one thing I want to say about stats, I meant to mention this
Nowellscreenshot.com.
earlier.
I don't need a
I meant to
black owl,
mention
sorry.
this. Okay, I meant to mention this earlier, but when it comes to stats, JNT and I don't like to. This guy's got good stats. He must be a good player. It's not that simple. But I think we like to bring up stats when there's an overwhelming amount um what's the word, evidence, right? Like for example, when he brought up the stats about Insanity earlier, he's doing well in every single stat, and I think that's where it's overwhelming that you need to mention it, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that he wasn't towards the top of all of those stats last year. So it's not like, oh, he's got good stats, he must be a good player. No, you watch his games, he's doing a lot in team fights. He's dishing out a lot of damage and just playing the role really well and getting priority. So it's much more complicated than just, oh, he's got good stats. But I do think stats help paint a larger picture. And so that's why we like to use them every now and then.
Yeah, stats, like you just said, stats don't tell the whole story. But when you're a player on a record wise middle to bottom of the pack team and have some of the best stats in your role, like it's just very impressive in general. And like you said, you go back and watch some of Insanity's games, they're pretty nutty.
Yep. All right, let's move on to awards.
Yep. We were just talking about him, but we got Popoff and Beansoup coming up next. For my Popoff, I got Insanity. I'm gonna throw the photo back up because
That man got the juice.
Insanity. We were literally just talking about him, so there's not much else to say. But I had Insanity as my Popoff.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat too much either. I think he's a valid pop-off recipient. So popping off this week, Insanity. Me, I went Perks, because I think this weekend we saw the first actual pop-off performance from Perks. He had some other good games, don't get me wrong, but I don't think we've seen that level of Perks yet that we want to see until we saw his Tristana this weekend. That guy was insane, and he was dumping on kids, so I had to go with Perks.
Yeah, he even had a pretty good Lucian game against Team Liquid. I think I didn't like the pick, but I still think he did actually a really good job on the Lucian mid in that game.
Yeah, damn. Well, I The thing is, what I do want to say with that though is I think he had a good game, but I also noticed they were giving him all the kills. Did you notice that?
Oh,
They were letting him last
oh, for
hit.
sure.
So,
But I mean,
so
I feel like
like
if you're playing Lucian mid, like that's something you should do.
yes, you're gonna put the resources into the Lucian to try to smash the game. Yeah, so that's just a little thing to add there. Who did you give your Beansoup award to? For those that don't know, we do these awards every week. Popoff is what it sounds like, someone who's really popping off, and then Beansoup is just meant for disappointment. Someone who disappointed you over the week gets the Beansoup award.
Shout out Sketcher. For my bean soup, I had Sunday. I was kind of discussing it a little bit when we were talking about, well, a lot of it when we were discussing 100 Thieves and our power rankings. But I just think Sunday has been the worst performing player on 100 Thieves, and especially this weekend, I was not impressed in any of their games, even in their win against Immortals. I think his Aatrox was all right. He kind of just did Aatrox things in the late game, but didn't have a very good laning phase.
And for just YouTube or podcast don't know, we are reading some of the live chat. So someone says, I think there's got to be a story behind the name Beansoup. There is. It's a long story though, but I won't go into it just because it's a long story. But there is.
Maybe
It's
one
just
time.
like I said. It's just meant for disappointment. Maybe we can explain it after the show if we're still live. But anyways, my Beansoup was actually Demonte. I stuck with the 100 Thieves theme on that one. Uh, I think that Demonte was the worst performing team on 100 Thieves. Mind you, for me that was just this weekend. I think you were talking about for the whole season, right?
Yeah.
With Someday that is. Yeah.
Both,
For
I
me it was
think.
this weekend. Oh, okay. Well then there you go. For me this weekend was Demonte. I think that guy can look so much better than he did. I'm not one of the naysayers on whether he can play control mages. I think he can. I think he definitely didn't show it this weekend though. And so that's why I was disappointed. Also, like I said before, I really was disappointed with the Zonia's rush. Come on, man. You need to dish out some damage. You need to spam some abilities. Especially with your whole comp is revolving around the Rel Oriana combo. Let's see that combo, man. Let's freaking see it. But we didn't, and not able to do much. So meh.
All right. Next
A
up.
little bit disappointed. We'll
Oh,
see more out of him next week. Let's get into predictions now.
oh, you were just lagging for a sec.
Okay, predictions. Oh,
Um,
sorry.
yeah, no problem.
Am I good?
I think so. Yeah, you're good. I'm pretty sure. Wait, can you talk for a sec? Just
Okay.
real quick. Oh yeah, okay, you're fine. Okay.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Week 4 predictions. We're past the midway. Part of the spring split now. First game back, we got C9 versus Golden Guardians. Cloud9, obviously.
Yeesh. I'm gonna go Cloud9. There's not much to say. We have Cloud9 towards the top. We have Golden Guardians towards the bottom. I'm glad that they took a win off of 100 Thieves. Do I think they can do that and C9? No. Who knows? Maybe I'll eat my words. Let's go next. TL versus TSM. I'll let you go first on this one.
This is a pretty hype game, actually. Like,
I'm excited for it.
I feel like this game could be very telling for TSM's season. I feel like if they're able to 2-0 Liquid in the regular season, like that's definitely going to be really good for TSM. However,
that would be really crazy.
I am going to pick Team Liquid. I think they looked very good in their game against Cloud9, and I think they'll just make improvements in, just in between weeks. I think Team Liquid is a team that is very good at making improvements, whether that's through gameplay or through the drafting phase. So, Team Liquid.
I'm going with Team Liquid, and if people are wondering why I'm disappointed to take, it's because I want to try to take more upsets, but I just don't got the guts to do it on this one specifically. I think that Team Liquid will be the first one to make a play. I mentioned that before, that TSM hasn't been the first team to make a play this year, whereas I think they should be. But anyways, Team Liquid, I think will make the first play, and I think they will snowball it. I don't think they'll throw their lead this time around, knock on wood. But anyways, Team Liquid. Next up.
EG FlyQuest, I'm going to go with EG.
Yeah, I'm going EG on this one. There's not much to say here. I do think that there's a chance FlyQuest could upset them with how Evil Geniuses has been looking, but I think they will turn it around as well. I'm sticking EG.
CLG versus 100T, 100 Thieves.
Actually, hold on just a second. I think you forgot to pull up the scores on how we're doing on our predictions this year.
Not that
I need to flex it while I'm winning before I lose my lead. I need to flex on this a little bit. My 1-game lead.
You were winning for most of the season, so
yeah,
relax.
But that might not stick around. So I need to.
All I'm gonna
say, flaunt it while I can.
All I'm gonna say in response to that is, you're 1-5 in our fantasy league, and I'm 6-0.
Okay, whoa.
So.
And Great. So just so people know, I am in second last in our fantasy league, but I'm also
You're tied for
getting in
last.
points against. Every single week, I play the guy who has the most points. I'm getting destroyed every time I play someone. I'm so tilted. I'm second or third in the league in points for, but I'm still in second last. Anyways,
You're tied for
I'm
last.
salty. Let's go back into the whatever there.
Okay. CLG versus 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves.
Yeah, 100 Thieves.
Immortals versus Dignitas. Actually, a pretty underrated game, I would say, in my opinion. I actually don't even know who to pick here. Do you have a team you're gonna pick?
I'm going Dignitas. I think they're the better team right now. I do think, like we said, there's good things about Immortals. I just think there's better things with Dignitas.
Oh man, I'm actually considering the Immortals pick here.
Go for the upset, baby.
Yeah, I'll pick Immortals.
Okay.
A little upset pick. Move on to Saturday's matches. Team Liquid versus FlyQuest. Team Liquid for me.
Team Liquid. Yep.
C9 versus EG.
C9 versus EG.
Hopefully, we'll have to see if C9 can avenge one of their only losses in the first part of the round robin. I think they will. Kind of like you said, EG has been struggling as of late, and I think Cloud9 has still been looking pretty good. We did just talk about them.
There's more that EG needs to fix, right? Like that's the problem for me is EG has more things that they need to fix to look good. So it's just Cloud9 for me. I'm not saying EG can't fix it, but I'm saying the more likely situation is that C9 cleans up their game before EG does.
Yep. Next up, wow, I'm just realizing now, like we got a ton of good games this weekend.
I'll take the upset on this one. I will take Well, it's an upset, right? We can call Dignitas over 100 Thieves an upset.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, I'll take Dignitas.
I'm gonna take 100 Thieves still. I do think they'll be able to fix a little bit of their problems. I don't expect Someday and Demonte to both continue to struggle. There could be a world where maybe one of them keeps struggling, but I don't think we're going to have another like repeat of last week where both of their solo lanes are not looking very good. So I'll go 100 Thieves.
Okay. TSM over CLG. I can't. I need to see more out of CLG before I start taking them again in these like big games. You know.
Yeah,
Can't do it.
I got TSM.
It's really simple. TSM's looking a lot better. CLG is not.
Yep.
Next.
Last game of Saturday, we got Golden Guardians versus Immortals. I'll take Immortals on that one.
I'm going Immortals as well.
We'll flip over to Sunday's matches. FlyQuest, one of the few teams to actually beat TSM in the first part of the round robin. I do think that TSM will get their revenge in that game. We've already discussed it. You know, TSM has been looking so much better than their first 4 games of the spring season, and FlyQuest ended up beating them on the first game of the season in a pseudo rematch of the summer finals. But I will go with TSM on this one.
Yeah, TSM. Again, not much to say there. TSM's the better team right now.
Another great game this weekend, 100 Thieves versus Cloud9. I'm going to go with Cloud9. They've been looking better as of late, and, that's why I'm going to pick them.
If I'm taking Dignitas to beat 100 Thieves, I should take Cloud9 to beat 100 Thieves as well.
I would agree with that logic.
Yep.
Next up, Immortals versus Team Liquid.
Can Revenge do it again?
No. No.
Yeah, true. No, he cannot. Team Liquid on that one. Next.
Yeah, and then we got Golden Guardians versus EG.
EG.
Man, EG, like, they're playing Golden Guardians. I'm sorry, but last game,
EG, and then
Dignitas versus
I feel like
CLG.
there's not a lot of close games this week, right?
Wait, there are already. I feel like there are.
Are there?
There's Team Liquid TSM. That's a close game. EG FlyQuest.
Yeah.
That's a close game. Immortals
Dignitas
Dig.
one- yeah,
That's
okay,
a close
okay.
game.
I'm getting ahead of
C9 EG.
myself.
That's a close game. Dig 100. Dude, there's hella close games. What are you talking about?
I'm getting ahead of myself because all of our picks are mostly the same.
Yeah, but I feel like I don't know. I'm known to make some last minute game time pick switches. So we'll have to see how that one rolls. But last game, Dignitas versus CLG. Dignitas is playing CLG, so I have to pick them.
Oh, God.
I will not make the same mistake twice
here.
of picking CLG. Stop. Never again will I do that.
I want to cheer for CLG in that game. I think I still can cheer for CLG in that game if we both have Dignitas. It's like if I'm wrong, it's okay. So I'm gonna go Dignitas. We both got Dignitas, but I'll probably be cheering for CLG.
Okay.
Let's fucking go CLG. Pick up some dubs. I want Broxa to get a dub on the board. Yeah, I want him to get a few dubs on the board, honestly. But anyways, Dignitas.
Oh, I forgot to get rid of these. Yeah, so that'll do it for our.
That is it for this week's episode with some quick news.
Oh,
Let's do that because
you're.
a lot of viewers probably wanted Hotline League set up, and then
Yo, you are lagging.
Am I lagging again?
You've been kind of lagging the last 20 minutes, but it was just pretty bad right there. I'll close it out here. We got quick news. Just for our last quick little topic. One thing that we were potentially going to discuss when we were talking about the whole import rules and NA talent development, but TSM is going to be running their own amateur scouting combine. They've done something similar to this in the past, in terms of, they recently, like in the last 2 years, they've developed a trainee squad. They've done another one of these kinds of events. I believe it was in early 2020. They're going to be running another one. If I remember correctly, it's supposed to be in March, maybe? I don't remember exactly, but it's something to be like that.
I don't know.
Next up, Voyboy joined FlyQuest. I feel like did this news happen in the week that we missed? But
I don't remember. I just know it was recent, right? It was like a week ago, so it could have been like right on.
Yeah. Voyboy joined FlyQuest. It feels like a perfect, like it's like a match made in heaven in terms of like both sides branding. Just feels like it just makes so much sense. I don't know.
I love it, man. I love dude. FlyQuest has done a really good job off the Rift with all the shit that they do. They've done a really good job. I'm really happy with FlyQuest. That's the impact that they've had on the league has been a lot better than some of the other lower tier orgs, however you want to word it. But anyways, moving on.
Next up, we saw in a clip from I Will Dominate show The Crackdown that Yankos actually wants to come to North America after this season, which was pretty interesting when I first ended up hearing this news, mainly because Reckless joining the G2 roster, similar to G2's previous iteration of the roster with Perks, they sort of gave it 2 years before, they decided to make a change. And it just feels like if G2 ends up doing well and they find success at Worlds, whether they make semis, whether they make finals again, it feels like if I was Yankos, I would want to run it back one more time. So I would probably only see this coming true like if G2, let's just say, doesn't do very well at Worlds, in a world where they don't make it out of groups or they lose in quarterfinals. I would see that happening. But I feel like if they're successful, there'd be no reason to leave. I'd want to do it again. I don't know.
It just feels like it's such a weird time for that news to come out. Like the season's barely underway and it's already kind of, I don't want to say it's decided because it's not decided, but it's a weird time for that. This is stuff that should come out in the off season. Honestly, it shouldn't come in the middle of a season, but anyways, kind of cool.
Next up, we have Khan, news that he's going to be retiring after this season due to his military requirement that, if I remember this correctly, all Koreans are required to do 2 years of military service before the age of 30, or maybe the age is 26 or it's 28, but you basically have to serve 2 years in the military if you're Korean, and Khan must go fill that requirement.
Yeah.
So, last up, or actually not last up because I have a late edition too, but one thing that there's been a lot of controversy on Reddit and Twitter the last couple of days are LP gains on Riot given accounts to players and personalities, and there was a Reddit post just discussing that the number one ranked EU West solo queue account, it's a Riot account that was given to this person. I don't know who this person is, but basically if you look at the LP gains on their account, they gain 33 per win and only lose 7 in 1,000 plus LP challenger, which is pretty crazy to think about. So yeah.
I think it might mean that, I don't know, but maybe they'll consider doing a soft reset on that, because that just ruins the climb, right? For everyone that wants to try to push for rank 1, it ruins the climb for all the high tier players. So that just kind of sucks. But anyway.
Yeah. Last up that I actually saw on Reddit this morning, I don't know a ton of information about it, but it just feels like something that's actually pretty important was FPX Bo To be honest, I don't even know who that
Oh
is.
yeah.
But he's been accused of match fixing and has now been suspended from the
That
LPL.
is a career killer right there, man. We've
Yeah,
seen it happen in other esports a lot, especially CS, honestly. It happens a lot in Counter-Strike, but
yeah. I'm
you
looking it up.
cannot match fix, man. Like
I,
it's so bad.
I'm looking it up right now, and he's a jungler for FPX. So I guess he's TN's temporary replacement, I would assume, because if you don't know, TN was taking a split off due to, I believe, like he has wrist or hand injuries, I think, something like
Well,
that.
and that's okay. Think about that though. You finally get a starting spot, and then you're match fixing. Yikes!
Yeah,
And
like you
someone
just
else mentions in
mentioned.
the chat, it's a scene killer. Very good point. It's not just a career killer. You're ruining the scene. Like, if there's suspicion that there's fixed games in the LPL, like that's really gonna hurt you.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it just a second ago, but like the highest profile like match fixing was in CS:GO with the whole I Buy Power thing. If you don't know, there was a former CS:GO team called I Buy Power that intentionally threw a match against another team for a lot of money in terms of in the value of skins in Counter Strike, and then the entire team got permanently banned for the rest of their careers. Some of them have been slowly unbanned, but like we just said, like these are things that can kill careers and can kill scenes themselves. So pretty crazy to think. I'm surprised that it's not getting as much traction. Though one thing I will say is I'm looking it up right now, and normally like when you think of match fixing, you think of like intentionally throwing games, and this guy hasn't lost a game yet. So maybe he's just like bad at match fixing or throwing or something like that. It's kind of
Bad at
weird.
throwing.
I don't know.
Anyway, that's it for the quick news, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Am I still lagging? Can I close out the
No,
episode, or
you're
should I
good.
let you
Do it
do it?
now before it happens.
Okay, so thanks everyone for coming to the live show. We had a lot of people. Thanks once again to Travis for the host or the raid or whatever the hell you call it nowadays. It is much appreciated, guys. Please do not forget to hit the follow button, and if you want to catch the whole VOD, we will have it uploaded to YouTube later tonight. You can find us on YouTube. If you find Clown Fiesta podcast, I'm sure you won't have a hard time finding us. I'm sure you won't confuse it with all the other Clown Fiesta podcasts out there. So you can find us on there. And also, our Twitters are on the screen. It's on the live stream. It will also be in the YouTube VOD. Follow us on Twitter. We will announce stuff about like when we're going live and all that kind of stuff. Thank you guys so much for being in the live chat as well. We really appreciate it. Is there anything else that I'm forgetting, JNT?
Um, no, I think that's it. You lagged at the end there, but
Oh,
you
we're
were just
available on all podcast platforms.
yeah, you were just lagging at the end there. But yes, thank you, everyone. Anyone who's new here from this Travis Gafford raid, or anybody who's just recently found out about our podcast due to any number of reasons, whether or not you just found it scrolling through YouTube, you found it through Travis Gafford. We really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you guys in the live chat each and every week. We'll say this again for anybody watching on YouTube, but feel free to drop a comment. We're very, active in the comment section in terms of responding. So, you have a question, you have a concern, you just want to ask us anything, feel free to do that. We'll respond to you probably within a couple hours for sure. So feel free to do that. We, like I said, appreciate each and every one of you. This has been episode 30 of the Clown Fiesta podcast.